Imagine, for a moment, that you are the Emperor of France. The year is 1807, and your name Napoleon Bonaparte resonates across Europe like the echo of a thunderclap. You have recently signed the Treaty of Tilsit, bringing temporary peace to a war-ravaged continent. What better way to celebrate such a grand diplomatic triumph than with a luncheon? But not just any luncheon. Rabbit hunt with your most trusted men. Yes, a rabbit hunt. A civilized, aristocratic activity filled with tradition and the mild thrill of the chase. Nothing fancy, nothing political, just sport. But this hunt, dear listener, would be unlike any other in Napoleon's life. In fact, it would go down in the odd corners of history, not for its success, but for its uncontrollable absurdity. A moment so embarrassingly surreal that many of Napoleon's official biographers barely mention it. And yet it happened. Setting the scene was meticulously planned. Napoleon's chief of staff, Alexander Berthier, took on the responsibility of organizing the event. It was to be held on a wide-open field on the outskirts of Paris, near the chateau at Grosbois, or perhaps Sisson's historical records disagree. The weather was mild, and summer hung heavy in the air. Berthier had everything arranged: the coaches, the flintlock pistols, the chilled wine, and most crucially, the rabbits. Berthier, with the zeal of a man eager to impress an emperor, had gone above and beyond. He procured hundreds, some say up to 3,000 rabbits to be released on the field. Not wild rabbits, mind you, but tame, domestic ones, soft, plump, and entirely unfamiliar with the ways of the forest or the fear of man. Here was the first mistake. The rabbits are released at midday. The party arrived, dressed in military finery and equipped with ornate hunting gear. Servants uncorked wine bottles. The sun beat gently against velvet coats. It was an elegant affair, somewhere between a state function and a garden party. Then, at Berthier's signal, the cages were opened. Now, in a typical hunt, the animals scatter. They flee in chaotic zigzags, darting toward bushes and trees, giving the hunters the joy of pursuit. But these rabbits did not scatter. They ran, yes, but not away from Napoleon and his guests. They ran toward them. The invasion begins at first. It was amusing. The men laughed. The rabbits bounded forward like soft gray waves across the grass. Perhaps they were confused or drawn by the colors of the uniforms. A few even sat on the soldiers' boots, sniffing with twitching noses. But the laughter soon turned to concern. The rabbits kept coming. Dozens, then hundreds. The field, once neatly arranged for leisure, turned into a scene from a surrealist dream. Rabbits leapt into Napoleon's lap, crawled up trouser legs, climbed into baskets of food, and overturned wine flutes. They pawed at boots and capes, swarming the imperial party with the focus of soldiers storming a hill. Napoleon, ever the man of order and discipline, stood and shouted commands. He swatted at them with his riding crop. Aides-de-camp tried to herd them with their hats. Some men took off running. Others tried to take refuge atop carriages. One man is said to have drawn his sword in defense, though this might be embellishment. The rabbits were undeterred. Why? Because these were farm rabbits accustomed to humans. Berthier had unknowingly sourced them from local breeders. To them, men meant food. They weren't attacking, they were approaching, expecting cabbage leaves and carrot tops. But there were no carrots in sight. Only French generals, a mildly panicked emperor, and a now rabidly curious crowd of fluffy, hungry animals. Dignity derailed in terms of dignity. Few events in Napoleon's life matched the sheer absurdity of this moment. Here was a man who had crossed the Alps on horseback, who had rewritten the laws of Europe, and who had built an empire in a matter of years. And yet here he was, in an open field, retreating from an army of rabbits. Eventually, the imperial carriage was summoned. Napoleon made a tactical withdrawal, his boots reportedly wet with grass and rabbit fur. Berthier, meanwhile, is said to have been nearly inconsolable mortified at how something as innocent as a hunt could descend into such chaos. No record suggests any rabbits were harmed, though that, too, is unclear. Some may have been rounded up, others left to wander. The emperor never mentioned the event in his letters. and neither did Berthier. The whole affair was quietly buried under layers of history and pride, but the tale lingered in back channels and quiet memoirs. One account came from Paul de Bourgogne, an aide who recounted the story decades later. It's amused at how the emperor, conqueror of nations, had been overrun by rabbits. And while it's hard to verify every detail, whether there were 300 rabbits or 3,000, whether Napoleon ran or simply walked briskly, one truth remains: it happened. And it was deeply, embarrassingly funny. The strange symbolism to us. Now, over 2 centuries later, it feels like a story from fiction. And yet it's very real, tucked into the odd folds of Europe's rich and sometimes ridiculous past. One can't help but wonder, what did Napoleon think of it afterward? Did he laugh, perhaps in private? Did he scold Berthier, or never speak of it again? Was this a reminder even to a man like Napoleon that not all battles are won by might, and not all enemies are predictable? In a world governed by strategies and military discipline, this was a rare moment where nature, or rather domesticated farm life, struck back, not with malice, but with confusion, hunger, innocence. And so ends our first glimpse into this peculiar episode. But the real question remains: what else do we know about Napoleon's love of animals? And did this moment affect his views forever? You now know the tale at once comical and surreal of Napoleon Bonaparte's rabbit hunt gone wrong. It's the kind of event historians rarely take seriously, perhaps because they fear how it challenges the solemnity of one of the most commanding figures in European history. But while the image of Napoleon fleeing from a herd of hungry bunnies is certainly amusing, it also opens a quieter, lesser explored door into his life: the emperor's complex relationship with animals. It's a strange theme, and yet a revealing one. For a while, Napoleon's greatness was measured in wars won and thrones seized. But it was also shaped by the rhythms of his daily life, by the animals he kept, the pets he owned, and the curious way in which beasts and birds passed through the corridors of power. Let us now step into these quieter places, not the battlefield or the throne room, but the garden, the chamber, the drawing room filled with the sound of paws, hooves, and feathers, of dogs and dictators Napoleon is not typically associated with. Animals. His portraits often show him alone, or at most with maps, swords, and skeptical expressions. Yet there are scattered records, fleeting, almost hidden, suggesting he did have a tender spot, particularly for dogs. One such story comes from the harrowing night following the Battle of Marengo in 1800. When victory in Italy solidified Napoleon's rise to power, after the battle, a fallen officer lay motionless on the field, his faithful dog refusing to leave the body. The animal snarled at any soldier who approached, nipping at hands that reached for its master's collar or buttons. Napoleon, upon hearing this, reportedly ordered the animal brought to him gently. He spent a moment looking at the dog. Some say he even petted it. Did he feel something in that gaze? An echo of loyalty not even his generals could promise. Though we cannot know for certain, there is a thread of truth in the way dogs were used and sinned during his reign. Napoleon respected loyalty above all. And what is a dog if not the purest symbol of loyalty? Still, he was not sentimental. In the traditional sense, there are no sweeping journal entries about pets, no official portraits featuring dogs at his feet. But he did permit them in the Tuileries. He did allow Josephine, his first wife, to keep her pug. Fortune, even though the dog once bit him on their wedding night when he tried to enter the bed, Napoleon reportedly respected the little dog's tenacity. He is braver than many men. He is said to have muttered, a joke perhaps, or a small nod of admiration. Josephine's animal obsession, to truly understand the animal kingdom of Napoleon's household, though one must turn to Josephine de Beauharnais, the Empress. Josephine was no mere dabbler in pets. She was an obsessive collector of living things. Her residence at Château de Malmaison became something of an early private zoo. After Napoleon left for his military campaign in Egypt, Josephine began filling her estate with animals from all over the globe.
How many of them guess?
From foreign dignitaries or soldiers returning from colonial posts. She kept kangaroos, black, swans, llamas, and even an orangutan who reportedly had a taste for wine. Exotic birds flew freely in the conservatory. At one point, she owned a female jaguar that wandered the gardens, though it was tethered and watched closely. To her, animals were more than mere ornament. They were fashion, prestige, even companionship. But they were also symbols of France's expanding imperial identity. Just as France was collecting territory, Josephania was collecting species. Napoleon reportedly found this habit both amusing and mildly annoying. "There are more beasts than people at Malmaison," he once said with a sigh. Yet, in the years after their divorce in 1810, he would occasionally visit her estate perhaps, under the guise of diplomacy, but perhaps too because it reminded him of a quieter, wilder kind of power, a garden filled with the world's creatures, undisciplined and strange. Horses and strategy, unlike his mixed feelings toward pets, Napoleon had an unshakable reverence for horses. They were not companions, they were weapons, partners in conquest. His favorite horse was a gray Arabian stallion named Marengo, named after the victory in Italy. Marengo was small for a warhorse, barely over 14 hands high, but spirited and strong. The stallion carried Napoleon into many key battles of Austerlitz. Jena, Wagram always emerged with minimal injuries. Marengo was captured by the British at the Battle of Waterloo and taken to England, where his skeleton now resides at the National Army Museum in London. A strange sort of immortality for a creature once seen galloping across the thunderous heart of Europe. Napoleon had other horses hundreds, in fact, but Marengo was singular. He knew his rider's moods, turned on his heel without command. He stood calmly during cannon fire. It's said that Napoleon trusted Marengo more than most of his officers, which is perhaps less surprising than it sounds. A gift of rabbits, and now back to the rabbits. The hunt that spiraled into chaos had not only been intended as sport, but also as a symbolic gesture. Rabbits were tied to French nobility, once reserved for lords to hunt on protected estates. By staging a grand hunt after a treaty, Napoleon was declaring both triumph and tradition. A return to calm after war, but nature, even when domesticated, rarely plays by rules. Some historians suggest that Napoleon's embarrassment after the incident led to his quiet withdrawal from anything resembling pet ownership or animal engagement. While never publicly confirmed, it is notable that after 1807, we hear less and less about animals in his personal circle. He still wrote occasionally about horses, still permitted Josephine to maintain her menagerie. But he, Napoleon himself, seemed to drift away from the softness of animals. Perhaps too many associations. Perhaps he couldn't forget the field full of rabbits, nipping at his boots, while his staff flailed helplessly. Still, there is something tender in that moment. A reminder that even emperors can be undone, not by revolution or assassination, but by a miscalculated buffet of bunnies. History's quiet moments, and here, you begin to see the quieter layers of historical narrative. While textbooks teach you about Napoleon the strategist, Napoleon the conqueror, the reformer, and the exile, they often skip over Napoleon the man, a figure who once stood with a glass of wine and a hunting rifle only to be gently overrun by a wave of fluffy creatures. Expecting snacks, these small, almost laughable moments serve as anchors. They pull Titans back down to the ground. In the tale of the rabbits, you don't see a general you see a man caught in the crossfire of poor planning and innocent confusion. And in that image, oddly enough, you may find more truth than in any battlefield painting or grand statue. Because history isn't made only in blood and bronze. It is made, too, in moments when nothing quite goes as planned. But there's one more question still to explore. What happened to those rabbits after the fiasco, and how did Napoleon's legacy become entangled with this strange, forgotten footnote of history? You are now deep within one of history's most peculiar anecdotes, a hunt where prey became pest. And an emperor was overwhelmed not by rebels or rival armies, but by soft, well-fed domestic rabbits. If it feels strange that such an event ever occurred, it's perhaps even stranger how thoroughly it was buried beneath the weight of Napoleon's legacy. No official reports, no paintings, No marble engraving of rabbits leaping over the lapels of the world's most famous general. And yet it happened. Confirmed in quiet corners of memoirs, hinted at in private letters, and occasionally recalled with amusement by 19th century historians eager to humanize an otherwise fearsome figure. Now we ask, what became of those rabbits? And more broadly, what does this forgotten moment say about how we tell stories of the powerful? The vanishing rabbits, the final fate of the rabbits is unclear, as historical records are notoriously sparse on the destinies of small mammals. But various second-hand accounts suggest three likely scenarios. Some were returned to the breeders. After the chaos, Bertier may have ordered the surviving rabbits recaptured and delivered back to their farms. This would have been a logical, if somewhat humiliating, logistical operation. Soldiers and staff chasing down dozens, if not hundreds of round-bodied escapees, and placing them gently into crates. You can imagine the quiet shuffle of boots in grass, the puffing of breath, and the faint embarrassment of it all. Some likely escaped into the countryside. If the event took place in early summer, the fields would have been lush, the hedges thick, and the fences low. Any rabbits not immediately recaptured might have scurried away into the French countryside. If so, it is entirely possible that the descendants of those well-fed imperial rabbits lived on for generations, hopping about in the quiet forests east of Paris, unaware of their accidental role in history. In others, well, they might have become dinner. The less sentimental side of the imperial court was pragmatic. Rabbits were, after all, a staple food source. It's not impossible that after the hunting debacle, a quiet rebranding occurred, no longer as game, but as roast. The chef at the estate likely did not waste resources. Whatever their fate, these rabbits left no monuments. Their story survives, only in anecdotes. And yet they arguably changed something subtle. Not in the political sense, but in the way the men around Napoleon saw him. Silence among the staff for a man so obsessed with control of maps, laws, cities, and right. Titles the failure of the rabbit hunt cut in an unusual direction. He was not bested by generals, was not outflanked by enemies. He was undone by the misjudged instincts of domesticated prey animals. And because this embarrassment came not from politics but from farce, it was quietly buried. Bertier never mentioned it in his journals again. No memoirs from Napoleon's inner circle treat it as more than a fleeting incident, usually retold in later decades with an apologetic laugh. And Napoleon himself? He seems to have erased it completely. There is no known quote, no passing reference, and no imperial decree involving rabbits after the event, which is unusual. Napoleon commented on everything. On roads, on ceilings, on cutlery. But not on this. One historian writing in 1883 described the event as a moment of comic intrusion in an otherwise operatic life. Another called it the most symbolically revealing misstep of his career, precisely because it was so trivial. And perhaps that's the real reason it was forgotten. It didn't fit the narrative. What the rabbits reveal history tends to iron out such contradictions. The story of Napoleon is large, thunderous, and filled with statues and marches and flags. To insert rabbits into it, well, it feels off-brand. But these odd moments are often more revealing than the dramatic ones. What do they show? They show that for all the power one man can accumulate, there remain forces too small, too soft, and too absurd to control. They show that human plans, no matter how detailed, are always vulnerable to the unpredictability of nature even tamed. Nature. They show that even in times of empire, there is room for comedy. It's not the staged kind, but the uninvited sort that arrives, unblinking with twitching whiskers and eager little paws. This story also subtly reflects on class and illusion. The entire point of the rabbit hunt was symbolic, a way for Napoleon to show that he was now not just a revolutionary, but an emperor who could host noble traditions. A return to courtly culture, a man of leisure as well as war. But the illusion collapsed the moment those rabbits ran toward, rather than away from power. There is poetry in that reversal. Even if it came on for little feet, the legacy that wasn't today. Napoleon is remembered for many things: his legal code, his battlefield brilliance, his exile, and his ego. He looms over the 19th century, like a colossus. There are cities named after him, roads, schools, a desert even, but not a single rabbit statue. No imperial farm. No children's book titled Napoleon and the Fluffy Uprising. Perhaps that's a shame, because while his reforms reshaped Europe and his wars redrew borders, this little story reminds us that greatness is also measured by how we endure the absurd. He endured it, but only barely, and never publicly, which is why we must remember it for him. It's not his mockery, but his gentle truth. One last thought. There's something deeply human in all this. We often imagine the past as grand and orderly, with kings and generals moving like chess pieces across the board of history. But real life, the kind people actually lived, was filled with blunders, confusion, and laughter that couldn't be written into law. The rabbit incident is not just a funny footnote. It's a reminder that even the most powerful men in the world are still just men. And sometimes even emperors get chased by rabbits. Napoleon Bonaparte's public persona, the indomitable emperor, the master strategist, the man who reshaped Europe, is known to many. But behind that imposing image lay a private world, often overlooked, where animals played a subtle yet intriguing role. While the rabbit hunt incident has become a quirky footnote, it was not an isolated moment in Napoleon's life concerning animals. His attitudes, experiences, and relationships with animals reveal a quieter dimension of the man behind the legend. A man of order and routine with animals, Napoleon was a man of discipline and control. So one might imagine that his interactions with animals would be regimented and utilitarian. To an extent, they were. Horses, as battlefield partners, were prized and treated as vital assets. Yet beyond the practical, there was room for tenderness. In his youth, Napoleon was known to care deeply for dogs. Some accounts suggest that his affection for dogs was linked to his broader views on loyalty and companionship. Dogs were emblematic of fidelity, qualities Napoleon demanded from his troops and allies. Unlike humans, dogs could be counted on, without question, yet this fondness was tempered by pragmatism. There are stories of Napoleon's dogs being taken away during battles to prevent them from becoming liabilities or even being euthanized if injured. His approach balanced affection with the harsh realities of war and power. The pets of the court, while Napoleon himself was reportedly reserved about keeping pets within his personal quarters. His first wife, Josephine de Beauharnais, was the opposite. At their Château de Malmaison, Josephine cultivated an extensive menagerie, collecting exotic animals and birds from across the French Empire and beyond. This menagerie was a living symbol of the empire's reach and her status as empress. The presence of these animals was not only ornamental, they were sources of fascination and conversation among the court. The exotic bird songs echoed through the halls, while the unusual mammals captured the imagination of guests. Animals became a form of soft power, display of wealth, taste, and imperial reach. Napoleon reportedly found some amusement and mild irritation in Josephine's animal obsession. Anecdotes describe him commenting on the impracticality of keeping wild animals in a domestic setting, reflecting his focus on military and political matters rather than leisure. Horses, the emperor's true companions. If there was one category of animal Napoleon cherished above all, it was the horse. Horses were central to his image as a military leader and to his actual campaigns. He was known for his skillful horsemanship and for his deep understanding of his mount's temperaments and capabilities. Marengo, his famous gray Arabian stallion, was a symbol of this bond. Marengo carried Napoleon through some of his most famous battles and was known for his resilience and endurance. The story of Marengo's capture and preservation after the Battle of Waterloo speaks to the enduring significance of horses in Napoleonic lore. Napoleon's personal care for horses extended beyond mere utility. He understood that the success of his campaigns depended on the well-being of his mounts and ensured they were well-fed, rested, and tended to by skilled grooms and veterinarians. This practical attention to animals in warfare was a key factor in the operational effectiveness of his army. The rabbit incident, in context the rabbit hunt that spiraled into chaos, was in many ways an extension of Napoleon's complex relationship with animals caught between his need for control and the unpredictability of nature. The rabbits were intended to be a symbol of leisure and aristocratic tradition, but became a humorous and unexpected reminder of the limits of human dominance. This incident also highlights how Napoleon's personal and political worlds sometimes collided. While he sought to project power and order on the grand scale of empires and armies, smaller, seemingly trivial events reminded him, and those around him, of the fragile, unpredictable nature of life. In the grand story of Napoleon and his rabbits, one figure stands as an enchanting counterpoint, Josephine de Beauharnais, the empress whose love of animals became almost legendary. While Napoleon managed vast armies and carved empires, Josephine curated a living symbol of that power, her private menagerie at Château de Malmaison. This collection was no mere hobby. It was a statement, a projection of the reach and ambitions of France, wrapped in the soft fur and feathers of exotic creatures. To understand Napoleon's world fully, one must step into Josephine's gardens and halls, where animals told stories as loudly as flags and treaties. A passion for the exotic, Josephine's love for animals went far beyond the usual cats and dogs. She surrounded herself with animals from distant colonies, rare birds with shimmering plumage, small monkeys with curious eyes, and even big cats like a tame jaguar that roamed her gardens. These animals were gifts from diplomats, colonists, and explorers, tokens of the expanding French Empire that connected distant lands to the heart of Europe. Each creature was a living ambassador, a reminder of French influence stretching across continents. The arrival of these exotic animals was an event in itself, often accompanied by parades of keepers and gardeners who introduced the latest arrivals to the court. Letters from diplomats included requests for particular species, and zoos of the era often competed to acquire the rarest specimens. Symbolism and soft power at a time when Europe was dominated by displays of military might and diplomatic intrigue. Josephine's menagerie was a softer form of power, subtle, refined, and seductive. It said, "We command nature as we command nations." The animals at Malmaison embodied the idea of control over the natural world. A central theme for the Napoleonic era's self-image, they were trophies of exploration and conquest, tangible, proof that France could reach beyond its borders and capture the world's wonders. Yet, they were also fragile, dependent on care and delicacy, a paradox that mirrored the empire itself. A garden of curiosities, the Château de Malmaison became a kind of early natural history museum, a place where science and spectacle met. Josephine was fascinated not only by the animals' exoticism, but also by the growing scientific interest in classifying and understanding species. Her gardens were designed not just for beauty, but to house aviaries and enclosures suited to each creature's needs. Ornithologists and naturalists sometimes visited to study the birds and mammals. Blending courtly life with early scientific curiosity, Josephine's passion even inspired artists and writers, who depicted her menagerie in paintings and poetry, further spreading the idea of empire through the lens of nature's wonders. Napoleon's ambivalence, Napoleon's feelings toward Josephine's menagerie were mixed. While he recognized its political and cultural significance, he often found it frivolous or distracting from the serious business of empire. He reportedly once said, half-joking, "There are more beasts than men at Malmaison." Still, their relationship was complex. Josephine's collection reflected the aspirations and contradictions of their reign. Power tempered by beauty, control, interrupted by wildness, an empire balanced by the domestic. After their divorce in 1810, Napoleon's visits to Malmaison declined, and with them, the lively animal kingdom Josephine maintained gradually dispersed. Some animals were gifted to zoos. Others passed away or were sold, yet the memory of that menagerie lingered as a symbol of a world where nature and politics were entwined in unexpected ways. When one thinks of Napoleon's armies, images of disciplined soldiers, booming cannons, and sweeping cavalry charges immediately come to mind. Yet beneath the thunder of battle lay a quieter, often overlooked force, the animals who sustained, transported, and accompanied the soldiers as they marched across Europe. Far beyond pets or curiosities, animals were essential to Napoleonic warfare, shaping the very logistics and successes of the campaigns. Horses, more than just mounts horses, were the backbone of Napoleon's military machine. From the thunderous cavalry charges to the nimble couriers who carried messages, horses were indispensable. The French army boasted tens of thousands of horses during the height of Napoleon's campaigns, representing one of the largest equine forces ever assembled at the time. Napoleon himself was intimately familiar with the qualities that made a good war horse: stamina, temperament, and courage. Under fire. Marengo, his famous stallion, exemplified these traits. However, horses were vulnerable. Starvation, exhaustion, disease, and battle injuries took a heavy toll. Armies often lost more horses than men, and replacing them was a constant logistical challenge. Cavalrymen would sometimes dismount and walk alongside their horses to conserve their strength for battle. The health of horses directly affected the mobility and morale of the army. Mules, oxen, and donkeys. The workhorses of war, while horses carried riders and pulled artillery. Mules, oxen, and donkeys were the true beasts of burden. Ammunitions hauled food, ammunition, tents, and artillery across rugged terrain. Mules, known for their hardiness, were especially prized for carrying supplies through difficult mountain paths or muddy fields where wheeled transport faltered. Oxen were slower but powerful, used for hauling the heaviest loads. They were less glamorous than horses, but just as vital to campaign success. The care and feeding of these animals required careful planning, and military veterinarians were tasked with tending to their wounds and illnesses. Dogs and messenger pigeons, while horses dominated, dogs and birds played subtle roles. Dogs were sometimes used for sentry duty or companionship, though less frequently on the battlefield. Messenger pigeons, however, were crucial to communication. With telegraphs yet to be invented, pigeons carried vital messages across enemy lines or between command posts. Their homing instincts and speed made them reliable couriers in a chaotic war zone. Napoleon's armies maintained pigeon lofts near headquarters, and trained pigeons could carry messages dozens of miles in minutes. Animals and camp life beyond the battlefield. Animals shaped soldiers' daily lives. Horses and mules provided companionship amid the hardships of war, and soldiers often formed bonds with their mounts. Camp followers, non-combatants, who supported the army tended to animals, providing fodder, grooming, and medical care. Animals also represented food sources. Rabbits, chickens, pigs, and cattle were raised near camps, ensuring a supply of fresh meat and dairy products. Soldiers' rations included preserved meats, but fresh provisions boosted morale and nutrition. The limits of control. Despite their importance, animals were unpredictable. Horses could panic, birds could fly off course, and supply animals could be stolen or lost. These realities echoed the chaotic nature of war and underscored the fragile human control over vast military operations. Napoleon's famous demand for order and discipline extended to animal soldiers, who were expected to care for their mounts and obey regulations about their use. Yet the story of the runaway rabbits in that ill-fated hunt serves as a whimsical reminder that even the mightiest armies depend on creatures who follow their own instincts. In Napoleon's France, hunting was far more than a pastime. It was a ritual of power, status, and social order. The act of pursuing animals, managing game, and hosting hunts was woven deeply into the fabric of aristocratic and imperial identity. To understand the rabbit hunt that spiraled out of control, it helps to place it within this rich context of symbolism and social meaning. Hunting as a royal privilege historically, hunting was reserved for the nobility and royalty, codified by laws that restricted commoners from taking game from royal forests and estates. It was an expression of sovereignty, the right to control land and life within it. The forests themselves became extensions of royal authority, where the king or emperor asserted dominion not only over human subjects, but also over nature. The size and success of a hunt could reflect the power and prestige of the host, a theatrical display of control over the wild. Napoleon's adoption of aristocratic traditions, as the revolutionary fervor faded and Napoleon crowned himself emperor, In 1804, he consciously embraced certain aristocratic customs to legitimize his rule. Hunting was a key part of this. Organizing grand hunts signaled a return to tradition, a message to European courts that Napoleon was not just a general, but a sovereign worthy of kingship. The rabbit hunt after the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, despite its comedic result, was intended to be one such grand gesture, carefully staged display of leisure, abundance, and control. Rabbits as game and symbol rabbits were somewhat of an unusual choice for such an event. Unlike deer or boar, rabbits were typically domesticated or semi-domesticated, often raised on warrens for food. However, their presence in hunting rituals connected to ideas of fertility, renewal, and abundance. Symbolically, the rabbit's rapid reproduction made it a metaphor for prosperity and growth ideals Napoleon wished to associate with his empire. However, this symbolism clashed awkwardly with the rabbit's behavior during the hunt, when instead of fleeing, they charged Napoleon, subverting the intended message. Animals and political theater. In this era, animals often participated in political theater. Royal menageries were public displays of exotic power. Falconry was a sport of kings, and animals featured in coats of arms and emblems. The Napoleonic regime employed animals in this symbolic language, though less overtly than monarchies with centuries of tradition. Even in propaganda, animals could serve as metaphors for the state, the army, or the ruler. Fierce lions, steadfast eagles, or cunning foxes. The unexpected disruption, the rabbit incident, then represents a disruption in this carefully choreographed symbolism. The rabbits, expected to behave as docile game, instead reversed roles and overwhelmed the emperor. This reversal was more than humorous. It symbolized the tension between human control and natural unpredictability, between authority and chaos. The fact that the event was hushed up suggests the regime understood the risks of allowing such moments to undermine the carefully constructed image of power. Napoleon's France was part of a wider European tapestry of aristocratic hunting traditions, complex culture that spanned centuries and kingdoms. To fully grasp the peculiarities and significance of the rabbit hunt, it is helpful to explore how other European courts regarded hunting and the keeping of animals as symbols of status and power. The royal forests of Europe, from the sprawling forests of England's New Forest to the dense woodlands of Germany's Black Forest, royal hunting grounds were sacrosanct territories, carefully protected and regulated. These forests were not just natural spaces, but curated landscapes shaped to support game populations and facilitate hunting rituals. They were also centers of administration, with gamekeepers and wardens enforcing laws that barred commoners from poaching or encroachment. The maintenance of these areas was a costly endeavor, requiring manpower and political will, but the prestige it brought to monarchs was deemed worth the investment. Hunting as a social and political ritual in many European courts, hunting was a social glue, a way to build alliances, display prowess, and reinforce hierarchy. Nobles gathered in the woods not merely for sport, but to negotiate marriages, settle disputes, and show loyalty to the sovereign. The hunt itself was often staged like a theatrical event, with careful choreography of roles: the master of the hunt, beaters, hunters, and falconers performing their part to create a spectacle of order and dominance over nature. The distribution of game after the hunt followed strict rules, reflecting social rank and favor. Animal keeping and menageries beyond hunting. Aristocrats collected exotic animals in menageries, similar to Josephine's at Malmaison, but with longer histories in Europe. Kings like Henry VIII of England maintained collections of lions, elephants, and other exotic creatures, often gifted by foreign dignitaries. These menageries functioned as both entertainment and demonstrations of global reach and wealth. Animals were symbols of conquest, mystery, and power, often inspiring legends and courtly tales. The unique case of rabbits. Rabbits held a particular place in European hunting culture, often raised on warrens and enclosed estates, designed for breeding. In hunting, they bridged the gap between wild game and domesticated animals. In England, for example, rabbit warrens were a sign of status and wealth, providing both sport and meat. The presence of rabbits in aristocratic hunting reflected practical concerns as much as symbolic ones. They were accessible game that could be bred and controlled, unlike more dangerous prey. Yet, as Napoleon's experience showed, even controlled nature could surprise. Lessons for Napoleon's hunt. When Napoleon organized the rabbit hunt, he was aligning himself with a deep and widely respected tradition. However, the choice of rabbits and the lack of experience in managing them properly exposed the limitations of adapting old customs without fully understanding their nuances. While deer or boar hunts had centuries of established practices, the rabbit hunt's failure revealed the fragile balance between tradition, control, and nature. This tension was emblematic of Napoleon's own rule-grand ambitions, tempered by the unpredictable realities of power. The grand ambitions of Napoleon's empire rested on one core assumption: that human will, reason, and power could bend the world to their designs. Cities could be built, armies raised, and laws rewritten. Yet the natural world offered a persistent reminder that not all could be mastered. No matter how great the ruler or vast the empire, the runaway rabbits of that fateful hunt are a gentle but potent symbol of nature's unpredictability in the face of human order. The illusion of total control. Napoleon's campaigns were marked by meticulous planning. March, routes, supply lines, battle formations, every detail was calculated. His success depended on order and discipline. Yet, nature resisted such control. Weather turned armies back, rivers flooded, and animals behaved unpredictably. The rabbit hunt was a microcosm of this struggle. Intended as a controlled leisure event, it became chaos as the rabbits defied their handlers and swarmed the emperor. This incident mirrored a broader truth. Even the most powerful humans are subject to the whims of the natural world. The empire's fragile foundations. Napoleon's empire, though vast and seemingly invincible, rested on fragile foundations. Famine, disease, and geography all posed threats that armies and bureaucracy could not fully overcome. Natural forces shaped the outcomes of battles and campaigns as much as human decisions. The Russian winter, the Spanish guerrillas, and supply shortages all reminded Napoleon and his generals that empire was not merely a product of force, but of adapting to an often hostile environment. Animals as agents of chaos and order. Animals in the empire played dual roles. On the one hand, they were symbols of order, domesticated, controlled, and utilized for human benefit. On the other, they represented chaos, wild, unpredictable, and indifferent to human ambitions. The rabbits, meant to symbolize abundance and leisure, unexpectedly subverted their role, reminding all present of nature's caprice. This interplay highlights the limits of empire's reach, where control is always partial and provisional. Reflections on human hubris. The rabbit incident, while amusing, serves as a quiet cautionary tale about human hubris. It suggests that no matter how carefully one plans or how firmly one rules, the natural world operates by different rules. These moments when nature appends human order are not failures alone, but reminders of our place within a larger ecosystem. Napoleon's empire, for all its grandeur, could not rewrite those rules. The peculiar episode of Napoleon and his rebellious rabbits did not become a staple of official history or grand biographies. Instead, it survived quietly, whispered in memoirs, hinted at in letters, and occasionally recounted with a wry smile by later historians. The story's journey from a near scandal to a charming anecdote reveals much about how history remembers and forgets the small, awkward moments behind great men, contemporary reactions, silence, and discretion in the immediate aftermath. Those close to Napoleon were reticent to discuss the event openly, seen as an embarrassment, trivializing the image of the emperor as a commanding figure. General Berthier, who organized the hunt, reportedly grew anxious as the rabbits swarmed. But official dispatches and correspondence make no mention of the incident. In fact, the deliberate omission suggests a desire to preserve the decorum of the emperor and avoid fodder for ridicule by political opponents or foreign courts. Memoirs and private accounts. The story resurfaced primarily in personal memoirs, written decades later when the urgency of political image had faded, figures like the Duke of Rovigo and other officers who served under Napoleon occasionally referenced the event, often with a tone of affectionate teasing. These recollections painted the hunt as a humorous footnote, a humanizing blip amid campaigns of conquest. One such account describes Napoleon's bemused reaction as the rabbits charged, highlighting the surreal contrast between imperial power and the softness of the animals. Historians' reception by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, historians began including the rabbit incident as a minor curiosity in biographies and encyclopedias. It was frequently used to illustrate Napoleon's complexity, his ambition tempered by moments of absurdity. The story also provided a counterpoint to the dominant narratives of glory and battle, reminding readers that history's great figures were not immune to small misadventures. However, some historians dismiss the episode as apocryphal or exaggerated, pointing to the lack of primary sources and the tendency of anecdotes to grow in the retelling. Cultural impact, though never widely popularized, the rabbit hunt has appeared sporadically in popular culture and literature. Children's books about Napoleon sometimes mention it as a whimsical aside, and certain historians have used it as a metaphor in lectures and essays. The event's endurance reflects a fascination with the unexpected, the quaint and the quietly subversive moments that punctuate grand history. Lessons from the margins. The muted reception of the rabbit hunt highlights how history often favors the dramatic over the mundane. Events that do not fit neatly into heroic or tragic narratives tend to be sidelined or sanitized. Yet these sidelined stories enrich our understanding by showing the multifaceted nature of historical figures and the mesinsis of real life. Napoleon's rabbits, by resisting capture and order, remind us that history is as much about the overlooked details as the headline battles. History often remembers the grand and the grave battles won, treaties signed, and legacies carved in stone. Yet, beneath these monumental narratives lie moments tinged with humor and embarrassment, episodes that humanize figures otherwise cast in monumental light. The story of Napoleon's rabbit hunt is one such moment, and its journey through history offers a fascinating glimpse into how laughter and shame influence what we remember. The power of embarrassment is a powerful social force, shaping not only personal behavior, but also collective memory. For leaders like Napoleon, maintaining an image of unshakable authority was essential to command respect and loyalty. An incident where rabbits, small, harmless creatures, overran the emperor would have been a source of acute embarrassment. The very absurdity undermined the aura of control and strength carefully cultivated by Napoleon and his court. Consequently, such moments were often suppressed or reframed to preserve dignity and power. Humor as a historical lens. Humor offers a unique lens through which to view history. It reveals the cracks in armor, the human quirks behind political facades, and the resilience of those who experience embarrassment. The rabbit hunt anecdote, while amusing, allows us to see Napoleon not only as a strategist and emperor, but also as a man caught off guard by a simple natural comedy. Laughter in this context is not mockery, but a bridge between past and present, an acknowledgement that greatness and folly often walk hand in hand. The role of anecdotes in shaping legacy. Anecdotes like the rabbit story serve to balance the grand narratives of history. They provide texture and nuance, reminding us that historical figures were not just agents of destiny, but individuals subject to everyday mishaps. Such stories may be excluded from official histories, but thrive in personal letters, memoirs, and oral traditions where they soften the edges of legend. They encourage empathy and invite reflection on the complexity of power and humanity. The selective memory of history, the selective preservation of events, which stories are told and which are forgotten, reflects societal values and power dynamics. Embarrassing moments may be omitted to protect reputations or political legitimacy, while heroic deeds are amplified. However, as historians and readers grow more interested in the full spectrum of human experience, these minor stories gain renewed importance. They challenge simplistic narratives and enrich our understanding of history's texture. Reflections on the rabbit hunt. Napoleon's rabbit incident encapsulates this dynamic. Initially a source of discomfort, it has evolved into a symbol of the unpredictability of life and the limits of control. The story's survival, despite attempts at suppression, highlights the enduring human need to find humor and humility in history. It reminds us that even the greatest figures can be brought low by the smallest things, and that in those moments lies a deeper truth about the human condition. History often shines its brightest light on moments of grandeur, tragedy, and triumph. But hidden within its folds are peculiar, often overlooked, incidents awkward, humorous, or simply bizarre that reveal the humanity behind the legends. Napoleon's rabbit debacle joins a curious club of such moments, offering perspective on the unpredictable nature of life, no matter one's status. The great empress and the ink spill take, for example, Queen Victoria, whose reign is marked by strict protocol and decorum, yet even she was not immune to everyday mishaps. Once, during a formal portrait session, she famously knocked over an inkwell, spilling ink across a treasured document. The incident was swept under the rug, but later became a favorite anecdote, illustrating that even the most poised rulers have moments of clumsiness. Churchill's hat misadventure, Winston Churchill, known for his steadfast leadership during World War II, was occasionally the subject of lighter stories. One popular tale tells of him arriving at a formal event with his signature hat, only to have it knocked off by a sudden gust of wind. The image of the unflappable prime minister chasing his hat through a crowded street captured a rare moment of levity amid tense times. Einstein's socks. Albert Einstein, the iconic physicist, was known for his brilliance but also his eccentricities. He famously disliked wearing socks, often going without them even on formal occasions. This quirk was a small rebellion against convention, a reminder that genius often comes with its own peculiarities. The artist who forgot his own name, Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter, was no stranger to oddities. But one lesser-known story recounts how, during a dinner party, he momentarily forgot his own name, causing confusion and amusement among guests. Such moments humanize figures often mythologized for their talents and eccentricities. Common threads. Humanity amid greatness, what links? These tales is their reminder that no amount of fame, power, or intellect insulates one from the whims of chance and human fallibility. Napoleon's rabbits, the spilled ink of Victoria. Churchill's lost hat teach moment reveals vulnerability beneath the veneer of greatness. These lost moments also serve to bridge the gap between historical figures and ourselves, making the distant past feel closer, more relatable. The value of quirky history in studying these oddities. Historians and storytellers find fertile ground for understanding culture, personality, and social norms of different eras. They break the monotony of traditional history and invite listeners like you to connect emotionally with people long gone. Napoleon's rabbits, in this light, become more than a humorous incident. They are a thread in the rich tapestry of human experience. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power was marked by a keen understanding of control over armies, territories, and people. Yet his relationship with animals, particularly the episode with the rabbits, reveals intriguing insights into the psychology of power, vulnerability, and the human desire to command the natural world. The symbolism of control, power, is often about control, controlling others, environments, and even oneself. Leaders like Napoleon exerted influence not only through force but through symbols, rituals, ceremonies, and displays meant to communicate authority. Animals frequently appear in this symbolic realm. It can represent subjugation, loyalty, or wildness tamed by civilization. By organizing a rabbit hunt, Napoleon aimed to demonstrate mastery over nature, leisure, and imperial grandeur in a single event. The challenge of unpredictability, yet control, is always partial. Nature is inherently unpredictable, and animals act according to instinct rather than commands. The rabbit's unexpected behavior, charging the emperor instead of fleeing, subverted Napoleon's authority, illustrating a psychological rupture where the leader's expectations clashed with reality. This moment highlights a fundamental tension in power dynamics. The leaders need to appear invincible versus the messy truths beneath. Animals as mirrors of human emotion interacting with animals often reveals human vulnerabilities and desires. Napoleon's attempts to engage with the rabbits may have been a subtle way to connect with a gentler, more controllable aspect of life amid the turmoil of empire. Yet the chaos of the hunt disrupted that connection, exposing limits of influence. For leaders, animals can be comforting symbols or sources of anxiety, reflecting deeper psychological needs. The humanization of greatness moments like the rabbit hunt remind us that even the most powerful are subject to forces beyond their control. They are human, with hopes, fears, and moments of humility. The interplay between Napoleon and the rabbits serves as a metaphor for the precarious balance leaders maintain between strength and vulnerability. Reflections on control and freedom. Ultimately, the story invites reflection on the nature of control itself. Is power about domination or about coexistence with forces greater than ourselves? Napoleon's experience with the rabbits suggests that true mastery may lie not in absolute control but in recognizing and respecting the unpredictable rhythms of life. History often paints great leaders in broad strokes of triumph or tragedy, emphasizing their grand successes or monumental failures. Yet, it is the small, seemingly trivial moments, the minor missteps and awkward incidents that often bring these towering figures down to earth, making them relatable and human. Napoleon's rabbit hunt fiasco is one such moment, a minor failure, that reveals much about the emperor's humanity. The weight of great expectations. Leaders like Napoleon carry enormous expectations, not only from their contemporaries, but also from history itself. Every action is scrutinized, every success magnified, and every failure remembered. Amid such pressure, even a small incident, such as a failed hunt, takes on disproportionate symbolic weight. The rabbits overrunning the emperor became more than a hunting mishap. It was a crack in the facade of invincibility. Relatability through imperfection, these small blunders are what make historical icons feel more approachable. When you imagine Napoleon swarmed by rabbits, you see a man caught off guard, flustered, and briefly powerless, a scenario anyone can empathize with. This contrasts with the distant image of the unyielding conqueror and invites a more nuanced appreciation. The role of vulnerability in leadership. Acknowledging vulnerability does not diminish leadership. In fact, it can enhance it. Leaders who show or experience moments of failure remind us that strength includes resilience and adaptability. Napoleon's response to the rabbits' calm amusement rather than anger speaks to an ability to absorb setbacks, however small. Such moments reveal leadership as a deeply human endeavor, fraught with unpredictability. The enduring appeal of quirky history stories of trivial failures survive precisely because they resonate. They offer a break from the gravity of history, injecting humor and humility. They also challenge the idea that leadership is flawless, encouraging a more compassionate understanding of the past. Napoleon's rabbits have endured as a reminder that behind every great figure is a person who stumbled. Connecting past and present today, these anecdotes help us bridge centuries, reminding us that power is complex and often fragile. They invite reflection on how we judge leaders, encouraging empathy for their imperfections. In doing so, they enrich the tapestry of history with threads of laughter, humility, and shared humanity. Napoleon Bonaparte's larger-than-life presence has inspired countless works of art, literature, and folklore. Yet, beyond the familiar portraits of military triumph and imperial splendor lies a subtler, often overlooked theme: his relationship with animals. This theme has resonated through culture in unexpected ways, reflecting changing attitudes toward power, nature, and humanity. Animals in Napoleonic portraiture. In official portraits, animals often appear as symbols, horses embodying strength and nobility, hunting dogs signaling aristocratic status. Marengo, Napoleon's famed steed, features prominently in paintings and sculptures, reinforcing the image of the emperor as a masterful horseman. However, rabbits and other smaller creatures rarely appear in such grand depictions, perhaps due to their association with fragility or even comic relief. Their omission mirrors how the rabbit hunt episode was sidelined from formal narratives. Literature's take on Napoleon, and nature writers and poets have occasionally used Napoleon's interactions with animals to explore his character. Some portray him as a figure caught between the demands of empire and a longing for simpler connections with nature. Others emphasize the contrast between his ambition and the humility inherent in being overrun by rabbits. These literary treatments often use the rabbit incident as a metaphor for the limits of human control and the unpredictability of fate. Popular culture and the rabbit hunt in more recent times, the story has surfaced in biographies, documentaries, and even children's books, often highlighting the humor and humanity behind the emperor's image. It serves as an accessible entry point for audiences to engage with history beyond battles and politics. The tale's enduring charm lies in its gentle subversion of expectations and its reminder that history's great figures are not immune to whimsy. The broader symbolism of animals and culture, Napoleon's relationship with animals reflects wider cultural themes about power, nature, and identity. Animals symbolize everything from loyalty and strength to unpredictability and innocence. Their depiction alongside historical figures shapes how we understand both the animals and the humans they accompany. In this sense, the rabbits are more than just animals, they are cultural signifiers, embodying ideas about empire, control, and the unexpected. Legacy and reflection today, the story of Napoleon's pet rabbits invites reflection on how history is told and remembered.
Had challenges.
Us to look beyond official records and consider the small, often overlooked details that color our understanding of the past through art, literature, and folklore. These moments continue to shape our image of one of history's most complex figures. The fall of Napoleon in 1814 marked not only the end of an empire, but also the dissolution of the carefully curated world. He and Josephine had cultivated a world where animals played symbolic and practical roles. The fate of his menagerie, including the infamous rabbits, reflects broader changes in political power, cultural attitudes, and the relationship between humans and nature in post-Napoleonic Europe. The dispersal of Josephine's collection, Josephine's beloved menagerie at Malmaison, was a symbol of imperial grace and global reach. But after her divorce from Napoleon in 1810 and his eventual exile, the menagerie lost its patron and protector. Many animals were sold off or transferred to other collections. Some were donated to emerging zoological gardens, such as the Jardin des Plantes in Paris, which was developing into a center of scientific study and public education. The dispersion marked the end of an era when private menageries signified aristocratic prestige, giving way to more institutionalized approaches to animal keeping. Napoleon's personal pets, Napoleon's own animals, including the rabbits from the famous hunt, faded into obscurity as his fortunes waned. Records suggest the rabbits were either released or redistributed among staff and local farms. The emperor's famed horse was taken by British forces after the Battle of Waterloo and lived out his days in England as a prized war trophy. The fate of smaller pets is less well documented, but reflects the transient nature of animal companionship. Tied to political power, changing attitudes toward animals, the post-Napoleonic period saw shifts in how animals were perceived. The rise of natural sciences and public zoos introduced new ideas about animal welfare, conservation, and education. Of royalty gave way to public institutions, reflecting broader democratic and scientific values. This transition influenced how animal stories, like Napoleon's rabbits, were recorded and remembered as curiosities rather than symbols of status. Animals, as historical witnesses, though animals cannot speak for themselves, their presence in history serves as a reminder of the lived realities behind political events. Napoleon's rabbits, Marengo, and the exotic creatures at Malmaison were silent witnesses to a tumultuous time. Their fates, whether celebrated, neglected, or forgotten, mirror the impermanence of human power. Reflection on legacy and memory, the dispersal of Napoleon's menagerie, and the quiet end of the rabbit. Episodes symbolize the broader decline of Napoleonic influence. Yet the memory of these animals endures, preserved in stories, artworks, and cultural imagination. They remind us that history is not only shaped by human ambition, but also by the animals and environments intertwined with it. Rabbits have occupied a fascinating place in European folklore for centuries. They are creatures rich with symbolic meaning representing everything from fertility and rebirth to trickery and vulnerability. This multifaceted symbolism casts a curious light on Napoleon's infamous encounter with his pet rabbits, revealing layers of cultural meaning that contrast sharply with the chaotic reality of that day. Fertility and renewal. One of the most enduring rabbit symbols is fertility. In agrarian societies, rabbits' rapid reproduction made them emblems of life's abundance and renewal. This association is evident in pagan springtime festivals and later Easter traditions, where the hare or rabbit symbolized the cyclical rebirth of nature. Napoleon's choice to hold a rabbit hunt after the Treaty of Tilsit as a moment that marked a hopeful peace could be read as a symbolic nod to renewal and prosperity for his empire. Innocence and vulnerability, despite their fertility symbolism. Rabbits were also seen as gentle and vulnerable creatures, prey animals that needed protection. In folklore, rabbits often represent innocence, timidity, or the common folk themselves. The rabbit's unexpected boldness in charging Napoleon disrupts this image, turning the symbol of meekness into one of unexpected defiance. Tricksters and folly. In some European tales, rabbits and hares are tricksters, clever, elusive, and sometimes deceptive. They outwit hunters or escape capture through cunning. This trickster archetype contrasts sharply with the notion of rabbits as docile pets, suggesting that Napoleon's rabbits were unknowingly playing the part of nature's pranksters. Cultural contrasts. The rabbit hunt's chaotic outcome can thus be seen as a clash between cultural symbolism and lived reality. Napoleon's attempt to harness the rabbit's positive meanings, fertility, peace, abundance, was subverted by their natural instincts, transforming the symbol into a source of unintended comedy and embarrassment. Reflections on symbolism. In Power, this episode invites reflection on how symbols are employed and sometimes betrayed in political contexts. Powerful figures often co-opt symbols to project strength or legitimacy, but nature and culture can resist such control. Napoleon's. Rabbits remind us that symbols have lives of their own, shaped by history, culture, and sometimes unexpected behavior. Napoleon's life and legacy have inspired countless works of art and literature, from grand historical paintings to satirical cartoons. While many focus on his military exploits and imperial grandeur, some artists and writers have drawn on the lighter, more unexpected moments of his life, including the rabbit hunt, to craft a more nuanced, humanized image of the emperor. Satirical cartoons and political caricatures in the 19th century. As Napoleon's legacy became a subject of debate, satirists seized on the rabbit story to lampoon the once mighty emperor. Political cartoons in France and England used the image of Napoleon overwhelmed by rabbits to poke fun at his ambitions and eventual downfall. These caricatures portrayed the rabbits as a symbol of nature's and fate's resistance to imperial hubris, serving as a humorous yet pointed critique of power. Literary allusions and anecdotal history. Some writers incorporated the rabbit incident into biographical and historical works, using it as an anecdote that revealed Napoleon's more relatable, fallible side. In novels and essays, the story often functions as a moment of comic relief, illustrating that even the most formidable figures are not immune to everyday absurdities. By weaving this episode into the fabric of his life story, the authors offered readers a balanced portrait of greatness, tempered by humanity. Visual art and popular culture, though rarely depicted in official portraits. The rabbit hunt has inspired smaller-scale artworks and modern illustrations. Contemporary artists sometimes revisit the episode to explore themes of control, chaos, and the intersection of history and myth. In popular culture, the tale appears in films, cartoons, and children's books, serving as an accessible introduction to Napoleon's complex character. The duality of image, power, and playfulness. The rabbit incident highlights the dual nature of Napoleon's public image, simultaneously commanding and approachable. Artists and writers who engage with this story contribute to a richer cultural memory, one that embraces contradictions and complexities rather than simplifying the emperor into a singular archetype. legacy and cultural memory, the continued retelling of the rabbit hunt reflects society's enduring fascination with the personal lives and quirks of historical figures. It reminds us that history is not only about monumental events, but also the small, often humorous moments that add color and depth to the past. Napoleon's rabbits, in their odd and unexpected way, have become part of the tapestry that shapes how we remember one of history's most iconic leaders. In World War I, amidst the mud and chaos of trench warfare, carrier pigeons like Cher Ami became unexpected heroes. Cher Ami saved nearly 200 soldiers of the Lost Battalion by delivering a crucial message despite severe injuries. This bird's determination turned the tide in a desperate situation, reminding us that animals can be agents not just of disruption but also of salvation. The cow that changed history in 1835, a cow in New York's Central Park wandered into a parade for President Andrew Jackson's inauguration, causing the procession to halt unexpectedly. While a minor incident, it highlighted how even small animals could interrupt carefully planned events, causing confusion and forcing improvisation. Rats and the plague, perhaps the most infamous example of animals disrupting human plans, involves rats during the Black Death in the 14th century. Fleas carried by black rats spread the bubonic plague across Europe, decimating populations and reshaping societies. Here, animals inadvertently played a catastrophic role, changing the course of history through disease transmission. Horses in the fall of empires throughout history, horses have both supported and hindered armies. In the 1812 Russian campaign, the harsh winter and lack of fodder devastated Napoleon's cavalry. Horses, essential for mobility and combat, became liabilities when the environment turned hostile, contributing to the French retreat and weakening the empire. Unexpected animal interventions, lessons learned, these stories, along with Napoleon's rabbits, underscore the limits of human planning in the face of nature's unpredictability. Animals, whether wild or domesticated, can disrupt even the most meticulously organized human endeavors. They remind us that history is not solely shaped by human will, but is a complex interplay between people, animals, and the environment. As we reach the end of this curious tale, the image of Napoleon Bonaparte's mighty emperor being charged and overwhelmed by a swarm of rabbits lingers as a strangely poignant symbol. It is a story that resonates far beyond its immediate humor or novelty, touching on enduring truths about power, control, and the unpredictability of life. Power and its limits. Napoleon's empire was vast, his influence immense. Yet the rabbit hunt reveals that no matter how great one's power, control over the smallest things is never guaranteed. This incident humbles the myth of invincibility, surrounding great leaders, and reminds us that nature often has the final say. The human side of history tends to favor grand narratives of battles and conquests. But it is the small human moments that often provide the richest insights. Napoleon's rabbits show us a private side of a public figure, revealing vulnerability, humor, and an unexpected humility. These stories deepen our understanding of the past by highlighting the everyday realities and mishaps that shape history's course. Nature as a persistent force. The rabbits' rebellion serves as a metaphor for nature's persistent resistance to human domination. Despite fences, plans, and power, the natural world remains unpredictable and autonomous. This dynamic invites reflection on how humanity relates to nature, whether through domination, stewardship, or coexistence. Memory and meaning. Though nearly lost to history, the tale has endured in memoirs, art, and popular culture because it speaks to universal themes: the clash of order and chaos, the limits of control, and the humanity of greatness. Napoleon's pet rabbits have become a quiet but lasting part of his legacy, a reminder that history is often found in its smallest, most unexpected details. A final thought for you as you reflect on this story: consider how the grand narratives of history are woven from countless small threads, some dramatic, others seemingly trivial, but no less significant. The rabbits remind us that sometimes it is in these small, boring moments that the true texture of history reveals itself. offering lessons in humility, resilience, and the enduring complexity of human life. Napoleon Bonaparte, the towering figure of European history, is often remembered for his battlefield genius, sweeping reforms, and empire-building ambition. But behind the grand political and military stage lay a quieter, more personal world: his domestic life. This world, filled with family, animals, and daily routines, provides vital context for understanding incidents like the curious case of his pet rabbits. The emperor at home, Napoleon's domestic environments, whether the Tuileries Palace in Paris, the Château de Malmaison near Paris, or his later residences in exile, offered a retreat from the ceaseless demands of leadership. These spaces were carefully maintained to balance formality with comfort, reflecting his dual needs for control and rest. Within these walls, the emperor engaged in family life with his wife Josephine, and later his second wife Marie-Louise. Though often separated by duty and war, Napoleon valued moments spent in relative calm. Animals, including pets and livestock, were part of this domestic tapestry, offering companionship and a connection to nature. Josephine's influence and the menagerie Josephine de Beauharnais, Napoleon's first wife, played a crucial role in shaping the domestic animal world. She was an avid collector of exotic plants and animals, and her Château de Malmaison became famous for its menagerie, which housed creatures from around the globe: parrots, tortoises, monkeys, and rabbits. Among them, Josephine's passion for her animals extended beyond mere decoration. She saw them as living symbols of her refined taste and worldly connections. This collection, though lavish, also created an atmosphere of gentle domesticity that softened the imperial image. Napoleon and his pets. Napoleon himself had a more pragmatic relationship with animals. Horses were essential to his military campaigns, and he was famously attached to his steed Marengo. Yet the rabbit's story reveals a side less often told: an emperor interacting with small, seemingly innocuous creatures, attempting to engage with nature on a humble scale. The rabbits, initially intended for a hunting event, were part of this domestic world, symbols of leisure, status, and the desire to command even the gentlest elements of nature. Daily life and rituals within the emperor's residences. Daily routines were tightly scheduled but included time for private moments. Meals, walks in gardens, and time spent with family or animals offered rare breaks from politics. The rabbit hunt itself, arranged by General Berdier, was part of this blend of leisure and ceremony. It was intended to celebrate peace and signal a return to normalcy after diplomatic negotiations. Yet, as the incident showed, even these carefully managed moments could spiral into unexpected chaos. The paradox of power and intimacy Napoleon's domestic life embodies. The paradox faced by many leaders: the need to appear invincible in public while seeking intimacy and control in private. Animals like the rabbits became proxies in this struggle, objects both to be controlled and sources of comfort. The rabbit hunt's failure thus reflects not only a humorous mishap, but also a deeper tension between imperial authority and personal vulnerability. In the carefully crafted world of Napoleonic power, symbols were everywhere: paintings, uniforms, flags, ceremonies, all conveyed messages designed to cement authority and inspire loyalty. Among these symbols, animals held a special place. Their use in imagery and propaganda was both deliberate and nuanced, reflecting ideas of strength, loyalty, and imperial destiny. Understanding this helps illuminate the curious place that Napoleon's pet rabbits occupy in the broader story of his reign. Horses, the epitome of power and nobility, no animal was more closely associated with Napoleon than his horse Marengo. This Arabian stallion accompanied him through many battles, becoming a living emblem of Napoleonic energy and determination. Artists immortalized Napoleon atop Marengo in portraits that emphasized mastery, control, and the ideal warrior leader. The horse symbolized not just military might, but also grace and nobility qualities Napoleon wished to project both at home and abroad. Dogs and loyalty dogs were another important symbol, representing fidelity and personal loyalty. Though less prominently featured than horses, dogs occasionally appeared in Napoleonic portraits and household settings. reinforcing the image of a ruler surrounded by devoted companions. Their presence subtly underlined themes of trust and emotional connection amid the often harsh realities of power. The exotic and the majestic Josephine's menagerie introduced exotic animals, parrots, monkeys, and other rare species into the symbolic landscape. These creatures reflected the global reach of the empire and the sophistication of the imperial court. They were living trophies of conquest and cultural dominance, enhancing the aura of cosmopolitan grandeur. Rabbits, leisure, fertility, and fragility compared to horses and exotic beasts. Rabbits occupied a more ambiguous symbolic space, traditionally associated with fertility and gentleness. Rabbits were also vulnerable and easily frightened, qualities that contrasted with the image of a powerful emperor. By organizing a rabbit hunt, Napoleon and his circle attempted to co-opt these symbols of peace and abundance, linking them to the era of calm following the Treaty of Tilsit. Yet, as the event revealed, these creatures defied expectations, highlighting the limits of symbolic control. The rabbit hunt as propaganda and its failure. The rabbit hunt was intended as a staged display of strength and control, a spectacle that would reinforce Napoleon's image as a ruler who commanded both man and nature. Its failure, where rabbits charged the emperor instead of fleeing, undermined this message. The incident was quietly omitted from official accounts, reflecting how propaganda selectively manages symbols to maintain power. Reflection. Nature's role in the theater of power. Napoleon's use of animals as symbols underscores the complexity of power as performance. Animals could be instruments of messaging, but their unpredictability also reminded rulers that control is never absolute. The rabbit episode, therefore, serves as a vivid reminder of nature's capacity to disrupt even the most carefully choreographed displays of authority. The peculiar episode of Napoleon's rabbit hunt might have been lost to history were it not for the scattered accounts left by those present and the curiosity it inspired in later chroniclers. How this odd moment was recorded, interpreted, and passed down sheds light on historical memory itself, what is preserved, what is forgotten, and how humor and human nature influence storytelling. Contemporary accounts, letters and diaries. Several officers and courtiers who attended the hunt wrote about the incident in personal letters and diaries. General Alexander Berthier, who organized the event, described the rabbit's unexpected aggression with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. His writings provide a rare glimpse into the informal, human side of Napoleonic life. Other eyewitnesses added their perspectives, noting Napoleon's calm demeanor despite being overwhelmed. These private records were not intended for public dissemination, but later served as primary sources for historians. Official silence and selective memory in contrast. Official reports and state documents omitted the rabbit episode. To maintain the image of an infallible leader, such moments of comic vulnerability were deemed unsuitable for public knowledge. This selective silence illustrates how governments and ruling elites control narratives to reinforce authority, excluding anything that might appear as weakness or ridicule. Historians' rediscovery. It was only in the 19th and 20th centuries that historians began to unearth and discuss the rabbit incident openly. The story, initially a footnote in personal correspondence, gained attention for its humanizing qualities. Biographers such as Andrew Roberts and David Chandler mention the episode as a charming anecdote, contrasting with the more familiar tales of conquest and exile. This inclusion reflects a broader shift toward exploring the private lives and quirks of historical figures. Popular culture and folklore beyond academic circles. The rabbit hunt entered popular culture as a humorous tale highlighting the unexpected foibles of great men. It appears in cartoons, children's books, and documentaries, often as a light-hearted interlude amid heavier historical content. This popularization helps keep the story alive, ensuring it remains part of the collective memory. Lessons from memory and storytelling. The rabbit incident's journey from private joke to public legend reveals how history is shaped not just by facts but by storytelling choices. What is remembered, how it is framed, and who tells the story all influence our understanding of the past. Napoleon's rabbits remind us that history embraces not only grandeur but also whimsy, offering a richer, more relatable picture of human experience. The story of Napoleon and his unruly rabbits is far from unique. Throughout history, even the most powerful leaders have found their carefully laid plans disrupted by animals or natural forces. These moments, often overlooked or retold with humor, reveal the persistent vulnerability of human ambition in the face of nature's unpredictability. Julius Caesar in The Omens. Julius Caesar, the Roman dictator, famously interpreted a series of animal omens, such as a raven flying near the cenotaph, signs foretelling his assassination. While the animals did not physically disrupt his plans, their symbolic presence foreshadowed the limits of Caesar's control. This example illustrates how nature's signs, whether taken seriously or superstitiously, affected leaders' perceptions and decisions. Queen Elizabeth I and the cockroach incident during a royal banquet. Queen Elizabeth I is said to have been startled by a cockroach that crawled onto her banquet table. The moment, recounted by courtiers, broke the solemnity of the event and reminded all present of the monarch's humanity. The incident softened Elizabeth's image, making her more relatable to subjects and historians alike. Winston Churchill and the pigeons. Winston Churchill, Britain's wartime prime minister, was known to have a fondness for pigeons. Yet in a humorous twist, a pigeon once flew into his office and caused a brief commotion. During an important meeting, the episode became a minor anecdote reflecting that even the most focused leaders can be momentarily derailed by the natural world. Theodore Roosevelt and the bear hunt. Theodore Roosevelt's 1902 bear hunt famously led to the creation of the teddy bear. While the hunt was staged to some degree, it highlights how encounters with animals can become symbolic moments in a leader's public life, blending fact, folklore, and political image. Lessons on power and nature. These stories, including Napoleon's rabbits, share a common thread. They humanize leaders by showing their encounters with the unpredictable forces of nature. Whether through humor, symbolism, or direct interference, animals remind us that power is never absolute. Such moments encourage us to view history through a more nuanced lens, one that embraces imperfection and the unexpected. To fully appreciate the curious episode of Napoleon's rabbit hunt, it helps to understand the biological and cultural context of rabbits in early 19th century Europe. These creatures were far more than simple game or pets. They occupied important roles in agriculture, folklore, and even the economy. This section explores the realities behind the rabbits that unexpectedly overwhelmed an emperor. Rabbit species and behavior. The European rabbit. Oryctolagus cuniculus is native to the Iberian Peninsula but had been introduced throughout much of Europe by the 19th century. Known for their prolific breeding, rabbits were common in rural and even suburban areas, valued for their meat and fur. Behaviorally, rabbits are skittish prey animals, usually fleeing predators with rapid, zigzagging runs. However, when cornered or protected, such as in a controlled hunting environment, they could act defensively. This defensive behavior likely explains the unusual boldness of the rabbits in Napoleon's hunt, where, instead of running, they charged the hunters, a rare but documented response when animals feel threatened en masse. Rabbits and agriculture. Rabbits were also significant in European agriculture. They were farmed in warrens for food and pelts. Their presence in large numbers near estates was both a resource and, at times, a nuisance, as overpopulation could lead to crop damage. This dual role meant rabbits were both treasured and feared, embodying a complex relationship between humans and nature. Folklore and symbolism. As discussed earlier, rabbits symbolized fertility, innocence, and, paradoxically, cleverness and trickery in European culture. In rural communities, rabbits were often featured in folk tales as cunning survivors, reinforcing their reputation as creatures capable of outwitting predators, including humans. This folklore provides a cultural backdrop that helps explain the lasting fascination with Napoleon's rebellious rabbits. Scientific understanding. In the 19th century, during Napoleon's era, natural history was a burgeoning field. The study of animal behavior was becoming more systematic, but many misunderstandings and myths persisted. Rabbits' social structures, breeding habits, and defensive behaviors were beginning to be documented. but few military leaders or court officials would have fully appreciated the complexity of these animals. The failure of the rabbit hunt, thus, also reflects a gap between emerging scientific knowledge and aristocratic practices. Broader ecological implications: the story of Napoleon's rabbits can also be seen as an early example of human-animal interaction issues that would become more prominent with industrialization, how domestication, habitat manipulation, and human interference affect animal behavior. It hints at the fragile balance between control and chaos. In ecosystems, a theme increasingly relevant in historical environmental studies. Across Europe, royal courts maintained menageries and prized animals as symbols of power, refinement, and connection to nature. Rabbits, while not as majestic as lions or as imposing as horses, nonetheless held a special place in the courtly imagination. Understanding how other monarchies regarded rabbits and similar animals sheds light on Napoleon's own use and misuse of these creatures. Medieval and Renaissance menageries. Long before Napoleon, European monarchs kept elaborate collections of exotic and domestic animals. These menageries served multiple functions, demonstrating wealth and reach, entertaining visitors, and expressing royal virtues. Rabbits are often featured as part of hunting grounds or enclosed parks. Their presence symbolized fertility and peace, fitting the image of a prosperous realm. The English royal warren in England, the maintenance of rabbit warrens was common among nobility. The royal warrens were carefully managed estates where rabbits were bred both for sport and food. The rabbit, associated with gentility and rural prosperity, became part of courtly culture, sometimes appearing in art and literature as emblematic of the countryside and traditional values. The French court and symbolism under the Ancien regime. French aristocracy prized rabbits for their symbolism of fertility and gentleness, fitting ideals of feminine grace and nobility. Keeping of rabbits at Versailles and other royal estates reflected these cultural meanings, blending leisure with the cultivation of symbolic capital. Josephine's menagerie at Malmaison continued this tradition, though with an imperial flourish, introducing more exotic species alongside domestic animals like rabbits. Other animals with symbolic roles besides rabbits, other smaller animals, hares, deer, and pheasants, also held symbolic value. They were featured in hunting rituals, art, and court ceremonies, embodying themes of renewal, purity, and the delicate balance between civilization and wilderness. The presence of these animals helped shape the cultural landscape in which Napoleon's rabbit hunt took place. Lessons from courtly animal culture. The histories of rabbits and similar animals at royal courts demonstrate how animals were more than just creatures. They were tools of symbolism, instruments of political messaging, and markers of status. Napoleon's attempt to harness this symbolism through his rabbit hunt was part of a long tradition. But the incident's failure highlighted the unpredictability inherent in such symbolic displays. Organizing a hunt or animal spectacle during Napoleon's era was no simple task. These events were more than leisure activities, were carefully orchestrated displays of power, status, and control over nature. The logistical complexities involved shed light on why the rabbit hunt, despite meticulous planning, turned into such an unexpected and chaotic affair. The importance of hunts in aristocratic culture. Hunting was central to aristocratic identity. In politics in 18th and 19th century Europe, it was a demonstration of mastery over land and animals, an expression of privilege, and a ritual that reinforced social hierarchies. For Napoleon, whose legitimacy depended on projecting strength in sophistication, staging a successful hunt was a political act as much as a pastime. Preparing the scene, location, and game selecting the right location was critical. Hunts often took place on private estates or royal parks, carefully prepared to accommodate guests and ensure an abundant supply of game. In the case of the rabbit hunt, General Berthier was tasked with gathering enough rabbits to create an impressive spectacle, which required coordinating capture, transportation, and temporary enclosures. Handling and transporting rabbits. Rabbits are delicate creatures, requiring careful handling to avoid stress and injury. Moving them in large numbers posed challenges, especially given the limitations of early 19th century transport. The rabbits contained but ready to release demanded skill, and mismanagement could result in animals escaping or behaving unpredictably. The role of huntsmen and staff experienced huntsmen, beaters, and gamekeepers were essential for managing animals and guiding the hunt. Their knowledge of animal behavior and terrain helped control the event's flow. However, even the most seasoned staff could be confounded by unusual circumstances, such as a sudden rabbit charge which revealed the limits of human expertise. The audience in protocol hunts involving the emperor were highly ritualized. Guests included military officers, courtiers, and diplomats, all of whom expected a dignified, orderly event. Protocol dictated seating, timing, and the sequence of activities, leaving little room for improvisation when unexpected events, like a rabbit rebellion, occurred. Communication challenges without modern communication tools, coordinating different groups during the hunt relied on signals, messengers, and personal coordination, making quick responses difficult. This limitation contributed to the inability to regain control when the rabbits behaved unpredictably. Reflection. Complexity beneath the surface, the rabbit hunt's failure was not simply due to the animals' behavior, but also the inherent complexity of organizing such events. It highlights how power rituals depend on many interconnected factors: logistics, human skill, animal temperament, how fragile these spectacles can be. History often presents the powerful in grand, solemn terms, focusing on battles won, laws passed, and empires built. Yet behind these monumental achievements lie moments of humor, embarrassment, and unexpected humanity. The story of Napoleon and his pet rabbits is a prime example of how such moments offer a refreshing counterbalance to the usual narratives of power. Humor as a humanizing force, humorous anecdotes about great leaders serve to humanize them, breaking down the distance between ruler and subject. These stories remind us that even the mightiest figures have flaws, vulnerabilities, and moments of folly. Napoleon's rabbit incident is one such story, revealing an emperor who, despite his immense authority, could be overwhelmed by a swarm of small animals. Embarrassment and power embarrassment in historical accounts is a complex phenomenon. While modern readers might find humor in the idea of Napoleon fleeing rabbits, for contemporaries, such moments were often carefully hidden or downplayed to protect reputations. Yet these incidents inevitably seeped into private conversations and memoirs, where they were retold with laughter and sometimes used to critique or satirize power. The role of court jesters and satire. Courts historically employed jesters and satirists who used humor to subtly comment on rulers and politics. While Napoleon's court was more formal and militarized than medieval courts, satirical prints and pamphlets circulated among the public, sometimes featuring caricatures inspired by incidents like the rabbit hunt. Public humor allowed society to cope with and question authority through laughter. Modern perspectives on historical embarrassment today. Historians and biographers include such moments to offer balanced portraits. They challenge idealized images and open space for empathy and critical reflection. The rabbit story is often cited to illustrate the limits of control and the unpredictability of life, themes relevant beyond Napoleon's time. The power of small stories while grand battles shape history's broad strokes. Small stories like the rabbit hunt resonate deeply because they capture the quirks and contradictions of human nature. They remind us that history is lived experience, full of surprises, humor, and sometimes humility. The story of Napoleon's pet rabbits has inspired a curious trajectory through historical fiction and popular culture, morphing from a quirky anecdote into a symbol of the unexpected and the fallibility of great men. This section explores how writers, filmmakers, and artists have interpreted and transformed this episode over time. Early literary treatments in the decades following Napoleon's reign. Writers of biographies and historical novels occasionally incorporated the rabbit incident, using it as a moment of levity or to humanize the emperor. Authors framed it variously as comic relief, a symbol of nature's resistance, or an allegory for the limits of power. Though often brief, These references introduce the episode to wider audiences beyond military and political history enthusiasts. The rabbit hunt in theater and film, while no major theatrical productions have centered on the rabbit hunt itself, the incident occasionally appears as a minor scene or humorous aside in plays and films about Napoleon. In cinema, particularly historical comedies or satirical takes on Napoleonic history, the rabbits serve as a visual gag underscoring the contrast between grandeur and absurdity. These portrayals highlight the incident's enduring appeal as a moment that punctures imperial seriousness with whimsy. Children's books and animated media, surprisingly, the story has found a place in children's literature and animation, where it serves as an engaging introduction to history through humor. Books and cartoons present the rabbits as cheeky, almost heroic figures who outsmart the mighty emperor, making history accessible and entertaining for young audiences. This adaptation reflects a trend toward teaching history through relatable and amusing stories. Internet and meme culture. In recent years, the rabbit hunt has experienced a resurgence online. It's often featured in memes, videos, and social media posts. The image of Napoleon fleeing from rabbits lends itself well to humor and satire, reinforcing the timeless appeal of underdog stories. Such digital reinterpretations keep the story alive in modern popular consciousness, albeit in simplified form. The balance of fact and fiction across all media, the challenge remains to balance historical accuracy with storytelling. While the rabbit hunt lends itself to humorous embellishment, responsible creators strive to maintain the essence of the event and its broader implications. This balance preserves the story's power as both entertainment and a historical lesson. As we conclude this deep dive into one of history's more unusual episodes, the image of Napoleon Bonaparte perdurbs, formidable, conqueror being overwhelmed by a horde of rabbits, remains striking and oddly memorable. The incident, while seemingly trivial, offers enduring insights into leadership, power, and the unpredictability of life. Beyond the humor, lessons in vulnerability at its surface. The rabbit hunt is amusing, a powerful man humbled by creatures often viewed as meek and harmless. Yet this event serves as a reminder that no amount of power fully insulates one from vulnerability. In a world of calculated strategies and grand ambitions, moments of uncontrollable chaos persist. This humility resonates not only in history, but also in modern life, where leaders and ordinary people alike face unexpected challenges. The intersection of nature and human ambition, the rabbit's boldness highlights the limits of human control over nature. Even in carefully managed environments, the natural world asserts itself unpredictably. Napoleon's experience echoes countless other moments where animals, whether or the environment, have shaped historical outcomes often in ways that confound human intentions. History's human side stories like this invite us to remember that history is not just a chronicle of monumental events, but a tapestry woven with small, personal moments. These anecdotes humanize figures often seen as distant or larger than life, fostering empathy and a richer understanding of the past. The power of boring history, the tale of Napoleon's rabbits, exemplifies how seemingly boring or minor details can reveal profound truths. By paying attention to such stories, we gain insight into the texture of daily life, the quirks of personality, and the complex dance between order and chaos. Last thought for you, as you reflect on this curious chapter, consider how history's grand narratives are shaped as much by unexpected moments and small disruptions as by sweeping decisions. Napoleon's pet rabbits and their quiet rebellion continue to teach us about the unpredictable nature of life and the enduring human experience of being, at times delightfully outmatched, while the chaotic rabbit hunt remains one of the most curious and lighthearted episodes associated with Napoleon Bonaparte. It represents only a small glimpse into his broader relationship with animals, one that was complex, it's multifaceted, and sometimes deeply practical. Napoleon and horses. The backbone of empire, Napoleon's most famous animal companion was undoubtedly his horse Marengo. This Arabian stallion carried him through many critical battles, including the battles of Marengo, after which the horse was named Austerlitz and Waterloo. Marengo was more than just a mode of transport. It symbolized Napoleon's military prowess, speed, and endurance. The emperor's attention to his horse's care, training, and endurance reflected his strategic mind. The health and reliability of his mounts were essential for battlefield success, as well as for the logistical mobility of his campaigns. Marengo's story didn't end with Napoleon. After the emperor's final defeat, the horse was taken to England, where it became a living symbol of Napoleonic legend. Dogs in companionship, although less celebrated than his horses, Napoleon also kept dogs during his lifetime. Dogs in the Napoleonic era were not only companions but sometimes served practical roles as watchdogs or symbols of loyalty. Historical records mention a few canine companions in Napoleon's household, although details are sparse. It suggested that Napoleon appreciated dogs' fidelity and protective instincts, qualities he admired in people as well. Birds and exotic animals, Josephine, Napoleon's first wife, is often credited with expanding the imperial menagerie at Malmaison, introducing exotic birds such as parrots and peacocks. These animals were emblematic of status and refinement, reflecting the empire's reach and sophistication. While Napoleon himself may have been less interested in the exotic, the presence of such creatures added to the ambience of imperial grandeur. Practical use of animals in military campaigns beyond companionship and symbolism. Animals were vital to Napoleon's military operations. Horses, mules, and oxen were essential for transporting artillery, supplies, and personnel. Napoleon's keen logistical mind recognized that maintaining the health and availability of these animals could determine the success or failure of campaigns. This practical relationship underscored the interconnectedness of human and animal lives in the era's warfare. Symbolism and leadership. Animals also played symbolic roles in reinforcing Napoleon's image. Horses symbolized strength and mastery. Dogs represented loyalty. And even rabbits, despite their eventual rebellion, symbolized peace and abundance. By engaging with animals in public and private spheres, Napoleon crafted a multifaceted persona: a warrior, a ruler, and a man connected to the natural world. Reflection. A leader and his animals. Napoleon's relationship with animals reveals a leader attuned both to the practical needs of power and to its symbolic languages. While the rabbit hunt highlighted a moment of loss of control, other relationships with animals demonstrated careful management and respect. This contrast enriches our understanding of Napoleon not only as a figure of overwhelming ambition, but as a man who interacted with the natural world in varied and meaningful ways. To place Napoleon's infamous rabbit hunt in its proper historical context, it's important to understand that rabbit hunting was a long-standing tradition in European aristocratic culture. This seemingly quaint pastime was not merely for sport. It was a ritual of status, privilege, and social continuity, shaped by centuries of evolving etiquette, symbolism, and utility. Origins of the rabbit hunt. Rabbits were first introduced to continental Europe by the Romans, who farmed them in controlled enclosures known as leperaria. Over time, wild rabbit populations spread, and by the medieval period, they had become a common feature of the European countryside. The nobility, always keen to turn nature into ceremony, began organizing rabbit hunts not just as a form of pest control or meat gathering, but as elaborate social affairs. In England, France, and the German states, hunting rabbits became an activity reserved for the landowning class, often carried out on enclosed estates known as warrens. The symbolism of the rabbit. While rabbits were hunted as game, they were also deeply embedded in symbolic traditions. As creatures known for their fertility and speed, they appeared frequently in religious and folk iconography. In medieval bestiaries, rabbits sometimes represented cowardice, but in other interpretations, especially in courtly art, they symbolized purity and the renewal of life. This ambiguous symbolism carried into the Enlightenment and Napoleonic eras, where rabbits were viewed with a blend of affection, utility, and amusement. Rabbit hunting as ritual. By the 17th and 18th centuries, rabbit hunts had become standardized social events. Participants wore specific attire. Hunts were choreographed to emphasize etiquette, and the prey was often released into the field in advance, sometimes even semi-tamed, to ensure a successful and enjoyable outing. These were not the wild, unpredictable, affairs of boar or stag hunting. Rabbit hunts were designed for leisure and for nobles to display grace, skill, and camaraderie. Napoleon's own event followed this tradition, planned as a light, symbolic break from the severity of war and diplomacy. But ironically, its breakdown occurred precisely because it had been overscripted. The tame hunt problem, one of the oddities of 18th and early 19th century. Rabbit hunts was the use of domesticated or partially habituated animals. Farmers or gamekeepers often bred rabbits in large numbers, sometimes releasing hundreds just prior to the hunt. While this practice guaranteed success and spectacle, it also created a risk. Animals accustomed to human hands might not flee. Instead, they might confuse hunters for handlers and, as in Napoleon's case, seek food rather than run. What was meant to simulate control over nature ended up revealing nature's resistance to being staged. Decline and reinvention after Napoleon's time, rabbit hunts remained a feature of rural gentry life, but began to decline as urbanization. Changing attitudes toward animal rights and shifting leisure activities emerged in the 19th and early 20th centuries. What had once been ritual became hobby and, later in some cases, anachronism. In modern times, rabbit hunting exists primarily in rural settings and is more regulated with emphasis on population control rather than ceremony. Reflection, a tradition undone by its own expectations, Napoleon's rabbit hunt was steeped in these historical traditions. But like many aristocratic rituals in the face of modern change, it was already becoming hollow, more performance than necessity. The very attempt to control the experience so precisely was what undid it. The rabbits, confused by human overmanagement, became the unexpected authors of their own brief, symbolic rebellion. The rabbit hunt that spiraled into comic disarray didn't organize itself. At the heart of the event stood one of Napoleon's most loyal and capable subordinates, General Louis-Alexandre Berthier, master of logistics. Berthier was the architect of Napoleon's most complex campaigns, yet his name became quietly tied to one of the emperor's most absurd misadventures. To understand the significance of the rabbit hunt and its failure, it is essential to examine Berthier's personality, career, and the unique role he played within Napoleon's inner circle. Berthier, the supreme organizer Berthier, was not known for flashy leadership or battlefield charisma. He was, however, Napoleon's supreme organizer, the mind behind the clockwork efficiency of the Grande Armée. As chief of staff, Berthier transformed strategy into coordinated movement across thousands of troops, managing correspondence, supplies, and operations with near-mechanical precision. Napoleon relied on him heavily, once stating that Berthier was the only man who could translate my thoughts into action without distortion. It was likely this reputation for precision and order that led Napoleon to entrust Berthier with arranging a light-hearted rabbit hunt in July 1807, just weeks after the Treaty of Tilsit had concluded peace with Russia. Planning the event, organizing a hunt, may have seemed trivial compared to maneuvering corps across Europe. But for Berthier, it was still a matter of planning and detail. He arranged the location, selected the participants, and critically sourced. The rabbits, hundreds, possibly up to 3,000, were acquired, not from wild warrens, but from local farms. These domesticated rabbits, unaccustomed to fleeing from humans, were the key ingredient in the day's undoing, according to several later accounts. Berthier arranged for the rabbits to be placed in cages or covered enclosures, to be released en masse when the hunt began. What followed, of course, was not a dignified display of sport, but an uncoordinated swarming of hungry rabbits converging on the emperor. Berthier's reaction and embarrassment, the hunt collapsed into absurdity almost immediately, as the rabbits charged toward Napoleon and his entourage expecting food. Not Vierberter and others attempted to redirect the animals with sticks, shouting, and frantic gestures. Witnesses recalled Berthier's embarrassment, his face reddening, as the scene turned into farce. For a man who prided himself on method and control, the failure was especially humiliating. Though no punishment followed, it is said that Berthier was more subdued for days afterward. Still, in true Napoleonic fashion, the incident was quietly dismissed, and no formal reprimand. No official mention, just a shared silence among the staff. A loyal right hand to the end, despite the rabbit fiasco, Berthier remained one of Napoleon's most loyal aides. He followed him through later campaigns, from the heights of Austerlitz to the bitter snows of Russia. Yet, there were cracks. Berthier's health and nerves began to suffer in the later years, especially after the emperor's first abdication. When Napoleon returned from Elba in 1815 for the 100 Days, Berthier, who had aligned with the restored Bourbon monarchy, did not rejoin him. He died soon after under mysterious circumstances, falling from a window in Bamberg. Whether accident, suicide, or political intrigue, the full truth remains uncertain. Reflection: even the best can be outmaneuvered Berthier's role in the rabbit hunt is a minor footnote in his otherwise impressive military legacy. Yet it reminds us that even the most methodical minds can be undone by something as unassuming as a soft, whiskered misunderstanding. In a strange way, the failed rabbit hunt may be one of the few moments when the famously stoic Berthier lost control of a situation and the world, or at least the rabbits laughed. Behind the peculiar chaos of Napoleon's rabbit hunt lies a context of profound political significance. The event was not arranged randomly, nor was it merely a whimsical country outing. It was intended as a symbolic celebration of one of Napoleon's greatest diplomatic achievements, the Treaty of Tilsit, signed in July 1807. To understand why the emperor, fresh from war and high-stakes negotiation, would agree to a leisurely rabbit hunt, we must step back into the tension, drama, the spectacle of that treaty and what it meant for Napoleon, Europe, and the fragile peace that followed. Prelude to Tilsit. The struggle against Russia and Prussia, the Treaty of Tilsit, marked the formal end of the War of the Fourth Coalition, in which Napoleon's armies fought against Russia and Prussia, formidable continental powers. The decisive Battle of Friedland, fought just weeks earlier in June 1807, had resulted in a sweeping French victory over Russian forces under Tsar Alexander I. The victory left Napoleon in a strong bargaining position and cleared the path for a face-to-face diplomatic summit between the Emperor of the French and the Tsar of Russia, two towering figures of European politics who had until then never met in person. Prussia, humiliated and crushed, was not invited to negotiate on equal footing. The scene was set for diplomacy in the most theatrical Napoleonic style. The raft at Tilsit, the meeting itself, became legendary for its setting. A grand barge anchored midstream on the Niemen River between the towns of Tilsit in East Prussia and Sovetsk, modern-day Russia. This neutral ground was chosen to signify equal terms, but in truth, Napoleon held most of the cards. The two emperors met in private, with interpreters nearby, but often ignored. They walked together, dined together, and exchanged philosophical conversations about the nature of war, monarchy, and Europe's future. In these few days, Napoleon appeared to charm Alexander I. A tentative alliance was formed, though one laced with mutual suspicion. Terms of the treaty signed in two parts, one with Russia and one with Prussia. The Treaty of Tilsit drastically redrew Europe's political map. Prussia lost nearly half its territory, including key lands west of the Elbe and all gains from the previous partitions of Poland. New client states were formed under French influence, including the Duchy of Warsaw, created from Prussian Poland, and the Kingdom of Westphalia, ruled by Napoleon's brother Jerome. Russia agreed to join the Continental System, Napoleon's economic blockade against Britain, and withdrew from the Fourth Coalition. In essence, Napoleon had restructured continental Europe in his image, forcing adversaries into alliance and sidelining others. It was one of his greatest political triumphs. Why a rabbit hunt? With the treaty signed and the war temporarily behind him, Napoleon returned to his imperial headquarters in France and sought to mark the moment with a gesture of peace and normalcy. In true aristocratic style, a rabbit hunt was planned, a gentle symbolic pursuit compared to the carnage of recent battlefields. It was meant to show that war was over, that order had returned, and that the emperor could now enjoy a moment of controlled pastoral leisure with his officers. The hunt was thus a political performance. But as history has shown, even carefully staged performances can unravel in nature, it seems, had its own script. The irony of celebration, the rabbit hunt's chaotic outcome, Napoleon retreating, from swarms of tame animals could not have contrasted more sharply with the regal tone of the Treaty of Tilsit's success. It was as if nature itself had offered a quiet rebuke to empire, a reminder that while borders could be redrawn and monarchs charmed, even the smallest creatures could disrupt the spectacle of power. Though it was never recorded in formal accounts, the timing of the event ensured that the story of the rabbits would forever be linked to one of Napoleon's greatest political victories. Ironically adding levity to a moment of supposed control, military history often dwells on generals and their battles, on maps and maneuvers. But some of the most revealing insights into leadership emerge not on the battlefield but in the quiet glances and shared silences of those who observe there. Commanders off duty. When Napoleon faced the absurd onslaught of hundreds of rabbits, the incident was not only a spectacle, it was also a moment witnessed by the men closest to him, his marshals, generals, aides-de-camp, and loyal officers. Their reactions, though rarely documented in official dispatches, hint at the complicated relationship between awe and affection, fear and fondness that Napoleon inspired. Laughter, behind the lines, though few dared to speak openly at the time. The sight of their supreme commander flailing amid a tide of soft-furred attackers was, by all accounts, a deeply comic image. Those present generals, such as Soult, Lannes, Savary, or perhaps even Marat, were men hardened by war. They had marched through storms, faced cannon fire, and survived brutal winters. Yet here they were, watching the Emperor of the French flee rabbits. A few may have chuckled under their breath, heads turned to avoid being seen. Others might have smiled in disbelief, but above all, there was silence. For a while the moment invited laughter, it also demanded restraint. Discipline and dissonance in Napoleon's inner circle. Discipline was everything. One did not mock the emperor, not in jest, not even gently. To laugh too loudly or to make a comment was to risk losing favor, or worse. Silence, camaraderie blossomed. Later that night, behind canvas or within candlelit officers' quarters, it's easy to imagine the suppressed laughter finally escaping. A reenactment, perhaps, a jest whispered over wine. But such humor would have been tightly guarded. In Napoleon's army, loyalty meant knowing when to look away. Shifting perceptions still, the event may have shifted something intangible. For younger officers or aides-de-camp, observing Napoleon in a moment of disarray, the illusion of invincibility may have briefly cracked. He was still the emperor, the strategist, the myth, the unifier of France. But he was also, unmistakably, a man, fallible, touchable, chaseable by rabbits, no less. These moments, small as they are, accumulate in the minds of followers. Humanize, and sometimes quietly they diminish. Rumors and retellings, no official military records describe the rabbit incident, yet within weeks and months the story likely passed down in formal chains, from marshal to general, from general to captain, until it reached the rank-and file as an amusing rumor. The soldiers of the Grande Armée, many of them poor men from rural provinces, would have relished the image. The emperor they revered being chased by farm animals. It was the sort of story that could survive years of marching and centuries of retelling. And perhaps, in the darkest days of later campaigns in the frozen snows of Russia or the mud of Waterloo, memory of the rabbits offered a brief, warming smile. Reflections in loyalty, despite the absurdity, Napoleon's officers did not waver. Their loyalty was deeply rooted, not just in fear or admiration, but in shared experience. They had seen him at his most triumphant, and now at his most comically vulnerable. And if anything that made him more real, a leader who could be mocked behind closed doors, who could suffer embarrassment without reprisal, was, in a strange way, a leader easier to follow. Not perfect, but human. The image of Napoleon being swarmed by rabbits, unable to reassert control, over a scene meant to symbolize order and authority, is more than a comic interlude in an imperial life. It is a metaphor, small in scale, but vast in implication. The emperor built his reputation on precision, timing, and dominance over men nations. In battlefields there were moments, both before and after the hunt, when reality defied even his strongest grip. These were not moments of glorious defeat, but of subtle breakdown times when the tools of command failed him, and chaos whispered around the edges. This section revisits a few of those episodes, revealing that the rabbit hunt, while ridiculous in nature, was not so different in structure from other, more serious unravelings. The fog at Austerlitz on December 2nd, 1805. At the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleon achieved perhaps his greatest military triumph. The Battle of the Three Emperors saw the French decisively defeat the combined forces of Austria and Russia, yet victory hinged on more than strategy. The battle was cloaked in a thick morning fog, which concealed troop movements and confounded visibility. Napoleon had counted on it, but fog is a fickle ally. Had it lifted sooner or later than it did, his central plan may have unraveled. Officers reported confusion on the ground. At one point, troops moved in the wrong direction, mistaking landmarks. It nearly cost him the left flank. Even in victory, nature intruded, reminding him that control was always conditional. The Moscow Fire 1812, when Napoleon marched into Moscow in September 1812, he expected to receive the keys to the city in triumph. Instead, he found it largely abandoned. Days later, fires broke out, intentional arson, most believed destroying vast swaths of the city. Napoleon's army had marched 1,800 miles to take a hollowed shell. He was left not as a conqueror, but as an uneasy occupant, staring at smoke. His letters from the time reflect frustration, bewilderment, and the creeping dread of winter. Here again, the script unraveled. What was meant to be a grand display of power collapsed into helplessness amid flame and frost. Spanish insurgency in Spain, which Napoleon assumed would fall quickly under French control, became a quagmire. Beginning in 1808, the Peninsular War introduced a new, unrelenting enemy: guerrilla fighters. These were not organized armies to be flanked or encircled, but civilians, peasants, priests, and partisans who struck and vanished. Napoleon called it his ulcer, and rightly so. Despite deploying some of his best marshals, Soult, Ney, and Messina, Spain drained France of troops, morale, and prestige. Napoleon's grip tightened, but the resistance grew stronger. It was a war of control slipping away, inch by inch. Waterloo, the final collapse. The most well-known of all Napoleon's reversals came at Waterloo in 1815. There he faced the Duke of Wellington and a coalition of European forces in a battle that has since become shorthand for final defeat. Delays in attacking due to wet ground, miscommunication between divisions, and the surprise arrival of Prussian reinforcements contributed to a battle that slipped from his hands. What had begun with confidence ended with disintegration. Horses run, cannons bogged, soldiers scattered. At the rabbit hunt, the plan did not hold, and the center gave way. Patterns of fragility in each of these moments, from a hunting field overrun with rabbits to a ruined city engulfed in fire, the theme is constant. Expectation undone by reality, whether by nature, resistance, or miscalculation. Napoleon's downfall was never solely due to mightier armies. It was often due to the breakdown of control, the failure of order where it was most expected. The rabbit hunt, trivial though it seems, is a miniature version of this pattern. A safe ceremony turns to farce. A conqueror becomes comic, and power in that moment is revealed to be delicate. For a man so deeply associated with war, law, and sweeping political reform, Napoleon Bonaparte was also a skilled choreographer of power. He understood that leadership extended far beyond legislation or battlefield victories. It required a carefully cultivated image of mythology made visible through performance. Every parade, every coronation, and every gesture at court served a function to convince both the people and the elites that his authority was not merely temporary or military but ordained, sophisticated, and stable. And in this great theater of power, symbolic rituals like the rabbit hunt played a central, if often overlooked, role. The power of spectacle from his self-coronation in 1804. When he placed the crown on his own head, to the staged military reviews and stylized imperial ceremonies, Napoleon used visual cues to shape how he was perceived. He borrowed heavily from Roman imperial iconography, adopting laurel wreaths, eagles, and classical architectural styles. The emperor's body, presence, and movements were tools of messaging. Whether astride Marengo or seated in golden throne rooms, these acts weren't mere vanity. They were strategic communications designed to impress both allies and enemies, citizens and foreign dignitaries. Hunts as symbolic events in pre-revolutionary France and throughout European monarchies, the hunt was never simply about pursuing game. It was a ritual of dominion. Man over beast, king over land, order over chaos. By organizing hunts, rulers asserted not just leisure, but control over the environment, over their nobles, and over nature itself. The number of animals, the conduct of guests, even the location of the final kill-all were orchestrated to reinforce the sovereign's authority. Napoleon, though a product of the revolution, borrowed these old-world symbols intentionally. The rabbit hunt in 1807 was one such gesture. It was meant to suggest a return to peace, mastery over land, and a nod to the courtly traditions that he, as emperor, now embodied. Control through ceremony for Napoleon. Ceremonies were about more than image. They were mechanisms of social control. Every title he bestowed, every uniform issued, and every military review followed strict protocols. Officers were instructed on how to bow, how to address him, and how to behave in public appearances. The state was a stage, and Napoleon was its central figure. When rituals went smoothly, they affirmed the illusion that the emperor's power was seamless and divine. But when they faltered us, in the rabbit hunt, the underlying fragility of that illusion could be exposed. Reclaiming the narrative, it's unclear how Napoleon processed the failure of the rabbit hunt. There are no official letters or memos addressing the incident. No correction was issued. No one was punished, at least publicly. This silence was intentional. By refusing to dignify the failure with a response, Napoleon prevented it from becoming a recognized story within the empire's official memory. He reclaimed control by denying the moment's significance. But outside the inner circle, the story lived on, retold in whispers, then memoirs, then books. The very act of trying to erase it became part of what made it endure. Reflection, rituals, are fragile things. What the rabbit hunt teaches, beyond its comedies, that rituals, no matter how grand, are fragile performances. They depend on cooperation, timing, and environment. They require reality to behave. When they collapse, they expose the careful scaffolding beneath the empire's polished exterior. Napoleon, for all his brilliance, could not command rabbits. In that, perhaps, lay the clearest reminder that even the greatest systems of control are ultimately built upon unpredictable foundations. In history, moments of humility often echo louder than moments of triumph. There is a peculiar fascination in watching powerful rulers, those who seem almost larger than life, encounter something small, mundane, or absurd that reminds them and us of their humanity. Whether it's slipping on a staircase, misspeaking in public, or, as in Napoleon's case, being chased by rabbits, these moments endure because they reveal what titles and medals often obscure: vulnerability. Napoleon was not the first, nor would he be the last, to be gently humiliated by the unexpected. This section steps back from the rabbit hunt to explore other such moments across history, offering a quiet meditation on how even the mighty are brought low by the ordinary. King Canute and the Tide. Perhaps the most famous example of a ruler humbled by nature is King Canute the Great. The 11th century English and Danish monarch. Legend tells us that Canute, weary of flattery from his courtiers, ordered his throne placed on the shore and commanded the tide not to rise. Of course, the sea ignored him. The waves rolled in, wetting his feet and robes. He turned to his nobles and pointed out that even a king's word could not command the forces of nature. Canute, unlike others, staged his own lesson. But the story has endured precisely because it draws a sharp line between earthly power and elemental truth. Emperor Nero and the theater. The Roman Emperor Nero, known for extravagance and cruelty, often performed on stage singing, playing the lyre, and reciting poetry. In one infamous incident, during a particularly long and self-indulgent performance. Some women in the audience reportedly gave birth before the show ended, while others feigned death or illness to be carried out. Here, the emperor's need for praise and control backfired, exposing the absurdity of his desire to be loved and admired through forced adulation. Frederick the Great's potato problem in the 18th century. Frederick the Great of Prussia attempted to introduce the potato to his people as a food staple, but the peasants refused to grow it, suspicious of this unfamiliar crop. Frederick resorted to reverse psychology. He planted royal potato fields and posted guards around them. Soon, peasants began stealing and growing potatoes, believing that anything worth guarding must be valuable. While the plan worked, the episode showed that even enlightened monarchs must sometimes outwit their own subjects, and that authority, no matter how progressive, can still meet resistance from below. Catherine the Great and the village facades during a royal tour of Crimea in the late 1780s. Catherine the Great was shown idyllic rural villages with content peasants lining the roads. But many historians believe these were Potemkin villages false. Facades hastily constructed by her advisor, Gregory Potemkin, to impress the empress. If true, Catherine was not just misled, but symbolically deceived by her own machinery of power. The very structures built to affirm her rule revealed how hollow court theater could be when faced with real conditions. The emperor's new clothes. Though fictional, Hans Christian Andersen's famous tale about an emperor parading naked through the streets has become a universal metaphor for blind authority and the failure of those around a ruler to speak truth. It speaks to the dangers of unchecked ego and sycophancy dangers that may well have hovered near Napoleon when he ordered a rabbit hunt to celebrate a treaty. And no one dared suggest that releasing tame, hungry rabbits might not go to plan. Rabbits and the river of humility seen through this lens. Napoleon's rabbit episode joins a long, oddly noble tradition, not of military defeat or political misstep, but of absurdity. A man whose armies had crossed rivers, conquered cities, and toppled dynasties was undone momentarily by soft, blinking, herbivorous mammals. The story endures not just because it's funny, but because it is true to life. Power, however grand, is never absolute. And sometimes the world delivers that message not with thunder or tragedy, but with a nudge from a wet nose and a wiggle of whiskers. Would you like me to continue with section 39? Reflecting on how the rabbit incident has been preserved or omitted in different historical accounts, and what that tells us about how history chooses its stories. Ask ChatGPT. You said, continue. ChatGPT said, certainly. Here is section 39 of The Curious Case of Napoleon's Pet Rabbits, reflecting on how the incident has been preserved, omitted, or reshaped in historical accounts, and what that reveals about the nature of history itself. Story 1. The Curious Case of Napoleon's Pet Rabbits section. 39. Whiskers and the Footnotes. How History Remembers or Forgets Embarrassment History. As we often imagine it, is carved in stone chronicles of kings, maps of battles, and declarations, etched in ink. But the truth is far softer, more porous. What survives the sieve of time is not always what mattered most, but what someone chose to remember, record, or retell. The tale of Napoleon's rabbit hunt is a case study in this quiet filtering of history. On its surface, it is a minor, humorous, anecdotal light footnote beneath weightier pages of war and empire. And yet, it has survived for over 2 centuries. Slipping past censors, outliving revolutions, and echoing softly in the margins of memoirs. But how? Why has this small absurd moment endured, while others of greater consequence have vanished? The silences of official records first. It's worth noting that the event does not appear in Napoleon's official correspondence or military archives. No bulletins, dispatches, or memoir entries penned by the emperor himself acknowledge the rabbit incident. This silence was likely deliberate. Napoleon was acutely aware of image and legacy. His letters, carefully curated even in wartime, projected precision, resolve, and grandeur. There was little room for comic misadventures, especially not ones involving panic and fur. Yet history's silence is rarely complete. Memoirs and margins, where the story lingered while the imperial archives were quiet. Memoirs in second hand. Accounts proved more porous. The story survived thanks to men like Paul Thibodeau, a politician who recalled the incident in later writings, and through recollections published decades after Napoleon's fall. Many of these accounts are light on detail and sometimes contradictory. Some claim hundreds of rabbits. Others say 3,000. Some describe an organized charge. Others say the rabbits simply swarmed in confusion. A few imply Napoleon laughed it off. Others suggest he stormed off in frustration. The differences themselves are telling. Not every story in history survives because it is true, but because it is memorable. The power of the anecdote. Historians often wrestle with anecdotes. They're vivid, emotionally resonant, and easy to retell, but they don't always fit neatly into the scaffolding of serious narrative, and yet it is often anecdotes that we remember most.
Ow.
The rabbit hunt endures because it contrasts so sharply with the rest of Napoleon's story. A man famous for order is undone by chaos. A warrior is overwhelmed by softness. The anecdote survives not despite its absurdity, but because of it. It humanizes a marble bust. Omission and the politics of memory. It is also important to note what stories are not preserved. The 19th century was an era of romantic nationalism. In France, Napoleon's legacy was revived repeatedly, first by Napoleon III, then by various political factions who viewed the emperor as a symbol of strength, modernity, or French acceptance. To these movements, the image of Napoleon being chased by rabbits did not serve the narrative. So the incident was rarely included in textbooks, military biographies, or official memorials. Selective forgetting helped shape the myth. But history has many layers, and not all memory is official. Rabbits in modern history writing today. The story often appears in popular history books, trivia compilations, and blogs. Writers like Andrew Roberts, while cautious, acknowledge it as a curious and likely true anecdote based on multiple 19th century sources. Modern readers, far removed from the politics of empire, are more inclined to appreciate the story's symbolic richness. We now understand that greatness and absurdity can coexist. That empires crumble not only by war, but also by missteps. And that a rabbit, properly timed, can be a more effective historian than a battlefield artist. Reflection. What we choose. To remember the rabbit hunt is a reminder that history is curated not only by what was written, but by what was omitted and what was whispered until it resurfaced. It also shows that stories endure when they carry meaning deeper than their surface. This particular tale, whether recorded in the margins or retold over wine and laughter, survives because it asks something timeless. What is power, really, if it can't outmaneuver a rabbit? In the vast architecture of history, the story of Napoleon's rabbit hunt is nothing more than a crack in the marble, a soft, strange indentation in an otherwise towering statue. And yet, like all good cracks, it lets a bit of light through. It lets us see the man behind the myth, the general, who crossed the Alps, reformed civil law, and shook the crowned heads of Europe. Was also once gently mobbed by a tide of confused, hungry rabbits. No cannon, no cavalry. It's just fur and instinct, meeting ceremony and ego in an open field. And that, perhaps, is what makes the story so oddly satisfying. It reminds us that history, so often shaped by force, is also haunted by chance and by the things no one can fully control. The illusion of control from ancient empires to modern states. Power is often a theater of precision. Kings wear heavy robes. Generals ride well-groomed horses. Presidents rehearse handshakes and speeches. Every movement is choreographed to suggest certainty. But behind the curtain, history is fragile. Battles are won and lost by the weather. Laws are overturned by rumor. Monarchies fall to printing presses, to pamphlets, to misplaced faith in continuity. And once in a while, a moment like the rabbit hunt breaks through the pageantry, reminding us that even emperors can be caught off guard. Control, it seems, is often more illusion than reality. The rabbit says symbol it's tempting to leave the story as nothing more than a charming footnote, something to chuckle at, then move on. But symbols have a way of lingering. And rabbits, in this case, are more than mischievous mammals. They represent what power most fears, the unpredictable. They weren't enemies. They weren't defiant. They were simply misunderstood, mismanaged, and hungry. Their behavior was not rebellion but instinct, and that was enough to undo a carefully orchestrated ceremony of command. That is the heart of the tale. That the grand spectacle fell, not to sabotage or politics, but to natural behavior misread by men who thought they were staging nature. The gentle collapse. There are many ways empires collapse, through war, debt, or rebellion. But there is another kind of collapse, the collapse of narrative, when the story that holds a regime together begins to fray at the edges. For Napoleon, this didn't happen at the rabbit hunt, but something rippled. A small, almost imperceptible tear in the mythos. Reminder, if only to those who witnessed it, that the emperor could be undone by something softer than swords. And those who remembered it as marshals, his aides, perhaps. Even Napoleon himself may have carried that image quietly in their minds. Through later years, darker times, and colder defeats, what remains in the end? This curious case leaves behind no monument, no painting, no official record, just a story. A story passed from mouth to memoir, from scholar to storyteller, and now to you. A small ripple in the ocean of history, but one that persists precisely because it is gentle, absurd, and deeply human. That may be the greatest irony in a life filled with calculated legacy. It is this tiny moment of failure that survives untouched by propaganda. The rabbits left no testimony, yet they remain forever bounding across this quiet corner of history. And so, our first story closes not with a bang, nor a march, but with a scamper. One emperor, thousands of rabbits. In the memory of a day when power was humbled, not by revolt, but by the very performance of control itself. Sleep well.